Here we go. All right, I'm going to call the March 24th Committee of the Whole to order. City Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderperson Bellinger. Here. Alderperson Borse. Here. Alderperson Close. Here. Alderperson Decker. Here. Alderperson Gravine. Here. Alderperson Heidemann. Here. Alderperson Menzer. Here. Alderperson Mitchell.
Excused.
Alderperson Perella. Here. Alderperson Rust.
Present. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, I'm looking for approval of the minutes from the Committee of the Whole meeting from November 5th.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor of approving those minutes, state aye. Aye. Chair votes aye. Those minutes are approved. All right, so some announcements here first before we get into the items. First, I will state that we have 2 staff that are dedicated to taking notes and from suggestions this evening for the zoning ordinance. And then otherwise, I will turn this over to Attorney Majerus.
Thank you. So tonight is a committee of the whole meeting. This is the body of council, but it is not council taking formal action. So the committee members, the alderpersons, will be having a discussion and listening to public comment. Staff will be taking notes on the preferences of the majority of the common council via the committee of the whole discussion and incorporating those into the next draft of the zoning code. Committee of the whole is not approving the zoning code tonight. Committee of the whole is simply discussing it and taking feedback. Committee of the whole will then refer it back to the common council or will table it for another committee of the whole meeting if that is what the body chooses. Either way, it will have to go back to council at some point before adoption. It will then have to be referred to the Plan Commission before adoption and then referred back to the common council for adoption. At any step in that process, we may add another committee of the whole meeting if the committee of the whole chair deems it appropriate and necessary. We will have public comment this evening, 3 minutes per person. We will have a presentation from the primary drafter of the zoning code, Sam Schultz, who is present in the room. We will also have a brief history of the project presented by Director Zeinert. I think that covers it.
Thank you, Attorney Majerus. And then for just a brief history of this process, I'm going to direct to Director Zeinert.
Hello all, thank you for being here today. I just want to walk through the timeline here to show how we all got here today. As many of you know, I started with Sheboygan in April of last year, so I'm just under 1 year here. So I just want to offer some historical context and things of that nature. The previous director, Diane McGinnis Casey, that is who started this project. I was able to go through her email correspondence to kind of get some historical context when it comes to here, or it comes to this project. On September 23rd, 2024, Diane McGinnis Casey, the previous director, had initiated a meeting with Von Briesen and Roper. The staff there, Sam Schultz, the consultant that's sitting behind me, was present. Attorney Chuck Adams was present, Mayor Sorensen, the zoning administrator, and also assistant to the city administrator, Marie Foss. Once again, September 23rd, 2024. Then moving to October of 2024, Diane McGinnis Casey had selected Von Briesen to move forward with the zoning code rewrite. She then had chose Sam Schultz, once again the consultant on this project. The review process then had started November of 2024. Schultz then had met with the zoning administrator to talk about the updates and things needed. The biggest concerns discussed there is making sure that the zoning code aligns with state statutes. Part of the zoning code is out of compliance, so we're looking to come into compliance there. Then I started with the city of April of 2025. And then from that point forward, the zoning code update was then brought forward to the Plan Commission. The first presentation was August 12th of 2025. The second presentation of the draft zoning code then is October 14th, also at Plan Commission. The third presentation of the drafted code was then presented at December 9th, 2025. The Plan Commission votes on the drafted code December 23rd, 2025. I will say that meaning the Plan Commission did have several amendments to that code. On January 9th, 2026, the zoning code then goes back to Plan Commission. The mayor requested that the draft zoning code go back to staff and go back to Plan Commission based on community dialogue and frustrations and things of that nature. From January 10th to March 9th, staff had spent time editing the zoning code, going line by line. Once again, the zoning code is now publicly available for review in that scenario. Committee of the Whole finds us here today on March 24th, just as Attorney Majerus alluded to. There might be a second Committee of the Whole to talk about updates and things of that nature. Something that I really want to echo is that this is a living document. I wasn't here prior to April of 2025, so I don't know why the code wasn't annually updated. However, that's something that staff hopes and continues to do. I think all of us acknowledge that the world is rapidly changing. The world is much different than it was 6 months ago to today. So making sure that the code evolves with us and not just sits on a shelf. That's something that staff is looking to do. I know Sam will highlight different adjustments and things that the code or the proposed code has to make updating it far more easier. With that being said, Chair, I would defer to you, but I would welcome for the consultant to come and speak.
Thank you, Director Zeinart. We will move on to item number 4, presentation by Sam Schulz, introducing draft zoning code. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sam. I'm a Land Use and Development Advisor at Von Briesen and Roper out of our Milwaukee office. I'm a certified urban planner that works with the attorneys there, and we do a lot of zoning code work for communities, both in the writing process, as we do today, and also the administration process. So just want to get out on the front end. We want to create something that's usable for the city in the drafting, not just something that's theoretical. When we were brought on to start this project, we had some project goals laid out for us. The first being mainly streamline administration and development procedures, removing those barriers for property owners and reducing government red tape. This is a pretty common one that we see across communities that we work. But over time, codes, as they grow older, they get Band-Aids on Band-Aids, and sometimes it's cleanest to look at a little bit more of a refresh to kind of pair back to community goals and objectives and reduce some of that red tape that's built up over time. Included in that, which I'll get into, are recommendation for staff review for by right decisions, reduced legal uncertainty, and flexible standards for complex infill and redevelopment projects. Oftentimes right now, you're running those through planned development districts or other kind of ad hoc decisions, which can be difficult to administer, particularly over decades and decades. So getting back to incorporating standards that we'll talk about today that are more objective and less subjective are really important. Next, acknowledging mainly for you all levy limit considerations. The only way to maintain current level of services per state statute is to grow through net new construction. So the zoning code plays a piece in your budget decisions through land use policy. Next, allowing sensitive infill growth matching neighborhood environment. So we've kind of broken it out into suburban, urban, industrial, downtown type districts. A lot of the movement in zoning is moving towards regulating things by intensity rather than a strict separation of uses, or what we call Euclidean zoning. So that more intensity-based focus tends to be a little bit more sensitive to context and neighbors, and makes it easier for example, a business to operate in an existing business space without needing numerous kind of special approvals from the Plan Commission, for instance.
Then moving on to add objective site design standards. So, a code is only as good as the standards included in it. And right now, the difficulty with the City of Sheboygan's code is oftentimes it is that kind of subjective standard there. So moving towards objective landscaping and screening, outdoor lighting, parking and access, and kind of consolidated and universally applicable sections. So has two benefits. One, it's clear for developers, property owners, the Plan Commission, the Common Council to read and implement those standards, as well as staff when they're implementing those standards as well. It's kind of a black and white a scenario there. If staff are reviewing a project for zoning code compliance, they're really calling balls and strikes instead of making up things whole cloth. And that is very similar to how current other city approval processes function. For example, when you submit a building permit, the building inspector, reviews it against the building code, and that's a pretty black and white process. If it complies with the building code, they issue you your building permit. The same thing here would apply to the zoning code. So the council is left to make legislative decisions, as Taylor just said. You're the ones setting policy, and then the staff are the ones implementing that policy in a very clear, concise manner. Next, incorporating modern zoning practices and policies to align updates with state law, which we'll get into a bit, and creating a framework for easier updates over time as city and market conditions change. Almost as important as the underlying regulations are the framework that we're proposing for the code. Right now, it's kind of a series of ordinances that require a lot of cross-referencing to look at whether a business expansion, for example, might be permissive, or if you want to add an addition on your home, you're looking across multiple different sections, which is tough. So we can unify those standards into clearer tables, single sections, so people aren't trying to become legal experts just to see if they can build an addition on their house. That framework is really very important, and some of the underlying reasons why we're doing something build off of that framework. So I'll run through that for you all in a sec. Talking about that recent legal context, so in 2017, Wisconsin Act 67 essentially created a lot of limitations in how municipalities can regulate conditional uses or any other special zoning permissions, as the statute reads. All of those conditional use decisions now must be based on substantial evidence, and it specifically says cannot include things like opinion, hearsay, or other types of kind of subjective standards as a reason to deny. So our legal takeaway at Von Briesen is by reducing that subjective approval process, these objective zoning decisions that I keep on mentioning are a lot easier to defend legally. You're reducing your risk. So not only are you providing clearer pathways for people to understand what they can do with their property, but you're also, kind of reducing that, we're going to just add a standard on at the finish line type of thing that can really frustrate a property owner. That is something that you all, kind of touched on in your code, but the updated framework really addresses more directly. So we're reducing conditional uses entirely and kind of taking them out. So instead, when we regulate a use, we set clear standards for that use in the ordinance. And if you find over time that those standards need to change, you all, as the Common Council, as well as the Plan Commission, the mayor, and the staff are all empowered to bring forward those changes to update the zoning code over time. So the idea is you're building in this process for feedback and continual update to keep the code more of a living document. And part of that is based on these limitations from 2017 Wisconsin Act 67 regarding conditional uses. The other one is 2023 Wisconsin Act 16, which really limited when a community can deny residential housing development applications. And it does that by saying when a permit is complete and submitted and it meets all the existing requirements at the time of application is filed, the city must grant that permit. It cannot add conditions to residential development applications after they submit it. So that really, again, reinforces having those standards proactive and objective up front, again, protects the city because if the statute says you can deny it or you can't deny it, you must approve it, you're going to be issuing a lot of permits You got to make sure that the standards that you have are ones that you're comfortable with. All of those together, again, objective approval situations are more important. The way that's structured through the code is not by granting the city administrator unilateral power at all. What it does is empower the zoning administrator to make those kind of balls and strikes decisions, like I said. So if something complies with the code as it's written, they can, sign off on their zoning compliance. A lot of people don't know the development process, so they might be able to think they can just, break ground right after that. But there are a lot of other steps before and after that zoning compliance review that I think people forget about and are not subject to the zoning consideration, but are important to keep in mind. So some things that may happen before, the development or the zoning administrator signs off on that zoning compliance review could be a rezone of the property. That still, by statute, has to be considered at the Common Council and Plan Commission levels. It could be a comprehensive plan or a neighborhood plan or other sort of regional planning document. That still has to be considered at your level. It could be a subdivision plat. All platting decisions, whether certified survey maps or subdivision plats, still have to go to the Common Council. So this doesn't take away any of your statutory authority. In our opinion, it actually reinforces your statutory authority. So the decisions that are coming to the Plan Commission and the Common Council are the ones that they have legal standing to say yes or no. The attorney doesn't have to show up, or the staff don't have to show up and advocate for something that nobody likes, but legally you have to approve. That puts everyone in a bad place. And so we're trying to avoid that situation entirely by defaulting to the reviews where you have the statutory authority to say yes or no. Moving on, I'm just going to kind of walk through some of the articles that you have here. There's really four main articles that we've broken the zoning code in, so that framework I was discussing. Article 1 is procedures and administration. So here we're cleaning up and consolidating how we're administering the zoning code through sections like introductions, applications, setting clear charts and graphs on decision-making authority, who can decide on what and how can they do it. And then it talks about individual application procedures. So how do we amend the zoning text? How do we amend the zoning map? How does staff complete zoning compliance review? How does staff complete sign permit applications and procedures? When someone appeals or asks for a variance, how does the Board of Appeals go through that process as well? So that's procedures and administration. Some takeaways from the draft code as it stands now. It conforms to the state law changes that I just talked about. It defers to staff when those objective standards are available, but it keeps the Plan Commission and Common Council approvals for those major decisions like rezones, text amendments, comp planning, platting, et cetera. Like I said, think of that staff level zoning review like how a building inspector already operates. So that zoning review is the same type of thing. And then, like I also just said, multiple bodies have the authority to initiate text amendments, including the Plan Commission and Common Council. So really focusing on keeping the document up to date over time. The second article is districts, so this talks about the purpose, the different zoning districts that the city has, the zoning map, its interpretation, and then the lot and structure regulations regarding setbacks, height limits, bulk standards for buildings. We put an example of the draft zoning districts in here. We did a little bit of consolidation to consolidate some of the similar districts by that intensity standard and local context. So you can see here we've broken it down into open space, agricultural, estate neighborhood, suburban corridor, which allows both residential and commercial along those corridors, urban neighborhood, urban corridor, again, same mixed use availability, urban downtown, when you're in the downtown, your industrial parks, and then natural resource protection overlay district. Also, planned development districts are still available to the council, but our hope is that with these updates, they'll be utilized less frequently and for kind of more large-scale campus-type developments when a planned development district is more applicable in those circumstances. Other takeaways on Article 2 are those unified lot and structure regulation tables. They're not in the thing here, but you can see in your draft zoning text that lot and structure table. So if you find that a setback isn't working for property owners. Either you're getting a lot of variances at the Board of Appeals, or you as alders are getting a lot of complaints. There's a single place for you to go in and amend that. You don't need to cross-reference of various different text sections. It's literally as simple as just updating a chart. So hopefully the ease of updating this and keeping it updated over time will be easier for you all as legislators. Article 3, uses, talks about the use table, interpretation of those uses and their guidelines, and then specific use standards within it. So we unified and simplified many of the use categories, and then put in specific regulations when needed. Some of those come in from your existing code, and some of them are new. Good example is outdoor seating areas within the A2 use category, which is food and drink uses. A benefit to this approach is also it more closely matches the state building code use categories. So there's a little bit of synergy between those two codes. If you're trying to open a business in an existing area, now the zoning classifications and approvals you need will more closely align with the building code regulations that you'll have. It eliminates conditional uses, as I discussed, and it also permits additional types of housing by right with specific standards attached. This is a takeaway that we discussed a lot at the Plan Commission level, but allowing things like townhomes, both condo, owner-occupied, and rental, accessory dwelling units, cottage courts, which are kind of groupings of smaller homes around a central green space. All of those are allowed with those specific standards. So it just kind of broadens the options for people to develop and redevelop within the city, specifically regarding housing. And then finally, we get into Article 4, which are those citywide design regulations. So utility service, intersection visibility, signs, architectural regulations, historic preservation regulations, parking and access, landscaping and screening, outdoor lighting, public art, and alternative compliance procedures when they can meet other goals and objectives for a little bit of that flexibility. That unified set of design guidelines is applicable on most properties unless it's specifically called out. Everyone plays by the same rules, so it's a lot more evenly distributed across the city. It's easier to update over time, again, because those regulations are in a single place. If you want to update the standards for a use category, it lives in a specific spot. You don't have to cross-reference it. If you want to update a specific landscaping standard, when you update that standard, it'll generally apply to all properties within the city. And it's easier to cross-reference. We've included content-neutral sign regulations. This was due to a ruling at the federal Supreme Court level that said the city can really only regulate signage based on time, place, and manner. You can't regulate it on content, which includes some difficult conversations, but we have to follow with kind of those, First Amendment right, free speech regulations from the Supreme Court. Increased focus on clear pedestrian connectivity. One of the things we heard through the process is to emphasize better parking lot design. Sometimes that's a connection between the front door of a business through a parking lot to the public sidewalk. Other times it is how those interact. Maybe it's by including bicycle racks or other types of things. So those standards live there. We've refined some of the parking standards to set minimums and maximums that we think are a little bit more in line with current market and parking lot standards. We've set a lot of landscaping standards and screening standards that are really focused on the public's view into a property. So looking at things like vehicular use area screening, outdoor storage and work area screening, mechanical equipment screening. So it's a little bit less prescriptive inside a person's property, but from the view of an adjacent property or the public, that is where we're setting more strict kind of objective standards. And within those, we also like to provide options. So you'll see in some of them, there's 2 or 3 options of how a property owner can meet those screening standards, again, to provide kind of that context and flexibility when properties differ. Then finally, we included some dark sky lighting regulations. Many communities are moving towards more sensitive outdoor lighting regulations as LED lights have become mostly cheaper for people to install. You can put out a lot more light for a lot less money now. So these are more objective standards based on reducing light pollution both at the property line and that kind of sky glow light pollution as well. Next up, we were asked by the staff to look at a couple different property scenarios of what does this mean for an average property owner. So here on Fifth Street, there's an existing structure that's kind of tucked up against the property line. Your current code has an aggregate setback, so 15 feet on either side of the property, which really means it's very difficult for this person to expand more than a foot or two from their house, even though they have a good amount of space between their south property wall and the property line. The new code sets less strict property setbacks for it. So you can see here the street yard setbacks are now 10 feet minimum, 20 feet maximum. The side yards go down to 5 feet. The rear yard has a 15-foot minimum. But we also are setting some impervious surface coverage maximums and building height regulations as well. What that does is in this red area here, you can kind of generally see the increased buildable area that this property owner would have under the proposed new code. Building off of that, there's a parcel here on 22nd that is basically unbuildable under the current setback regulations. Really, that side yard setback of 25 feet because it's a corner lot, it has 2 street yards, makes it very difficult to develop, plus a 25-foot rear yard setback. Again, this is one of those aggregate setbacks, so it's 25 and 5 on the sides for a 30-foot total aggregate setback. And you can see here, it's very difficult to build a house. Habitat was apparently interested in this lot to build, but you would need likely numerous zoning variances from setbacks just to put an urban house on this lot. When we talk about context, we also like to look at the surrounding properties. You can see just to the property to the east doesn't meet any of these setbacks. So the current zoning regulations are not actually sensitive to the existing built environment, which is a good key of perhaps some of these regulations, they might have gotten stricter over time or been implemented over time in a way where these properties were rezoned. Effectively, it made it unbuildable. So under the current draft zoning ordinance, you can see with our reduced setbacks, we have a much larger buildable area here, and in my professional opinion, the lot would be much easier for Habitat or a similar property owner to build, a detached house on this property under the draft code. I also should note this lot is legal non-conforming, even though it's existed in very similar to its neighbors, because under the current zoning district, it has a minimum 6,000 square foot limit. So by itself, it's already legal non-conforming, where we've reduced some of those property size regulations down to 3,600 square feet. So trying to build in more lots are just kind of allowed to be as they currently exist. Finally, we heard from staff that there's been a lot of issues at the staff level of denying people who want to either replace or build on front porches, which are generally something that many municipalities encourage, right? You get more eyes on the street, kind of provides both improvements to a property as well as makes a home generally look nicer and feel more neighborly. Well, you can see here under the current zoning setbacks here, not only is the front porch on this property not legal, the front setback actually goes like a third of the way into the house itself. It's probably only 5-10 feet away from the property line. So you can see here, if you were looking to, if it was torn down by a tornado, legal non-conforming statutes would apply and they could rebuild it as is here. But if a property owner voluntarily took it down to try to rebuild it in a nicer manner, then the staff have to apply the current zoning standards, and they couldn't allow this without a zoning variance. So under the new code, we have that 10-foot proposed front setback, which you can see is much closer to the local context here about exactly where it's at. And so if they did take down that front porch to rebuild it, they would have a lot more flexibility in how and where they could do it in a way that makes sense for the current aspect of the property. So with that, that's kind of my brief run through of the draft zoning ordinance. Again, flexibility, long-term standards. I don't think this draft should or is or will be perfect, but I think the framework it sets up empowers you all to make it more perfect over time. In many communities where we work, staff, as Taylor said, are doing 6-month or annual updates to their code. So it lives and breathes and changes over time. So we really think this allows you to do that. If there's a new use that everyone is up in arms about or a new use that everyone loves, this allows you to incorporate standards for those uses in a clear, decisive document and, make sure the city stays flexible for development decisions in the long run.
Thank you, Sam. All right, so I'm going to encourage everybody that's staying in the back there. We do have seating on this side of the space if you so want. Over here, to your right, my left. All righty, so with that, we're going to move on to item number 5. I'm going to read it so that we all are on the same page. Attendee participation will occur after presentations have been concluded. Attendees wishing to participate should sign in at the podium prior to the meeting commencement and will be limited to 3 minutes per person. Attendee participation will end no later than 7:30. So with that being said, I'll have the city clerk call our first attendee.
Thank you, Alder Rust. Jim Williams.
Jim, just give your name, address, and you got 3 minutes. Oh,
Oop, there we go. Jim Williams, 2425 South 11th Street in Sheboygan. I first want to thank the committee for doing this. I think a 30-year rewrite is probably a little overdue. In the last couple of days, I have read about a community in Tennessee that's dealing with a low-grade uranium enrichment center that they want to build. And I've also read about detention centers being built in small communities. And so I think as you look at the code, I just ask you to think globally about some of the issues that confront us now, and then things that may show up that we aren't even aware of, and how fast those change. You've dealt with data centers in the code, and I really do appreciate that. The one thing that I wanted to ask about is I have read about removal of environmental elements to the code. I would just ask that somehow you show what those were and what they are. The red line, and I'm no expert in codes, the red line is a decent redlining, but it doesn't capture some of the things that may have been in the code previously pertaining to environmental concerns. That's it. Thank you.
thank you, Jim.
Next person is Lisa Salgado.
All right, Lisa, name and address, and then you have 3 minutes.
Okay. Lisa Salgado, 4th Street. Dear Common Council, I'm asking you to stop this full zoning ordinance rewrite. There was never a resolution approving the $60,000 to $70,000 cost. Under Wisconsin Statute 6211, you control city finances, not staff. If a contract was entered into above that authority, then that was executed beyond legal limits. On top of that, the contract itself was never formally brought before you for approval. That alone should raise serious concerns. We do not need a full rewrite. This ordinance has been updated over time through amendments. It hasn't been 30 years. That process works. What's being proposed now isn't just a cleanup, it's a complete shift in how power is handled in this city. This draft strips authority away from elected officials, the Plan Commission, and this council, and places it into the hands of one unelected staff member. This is not how local government is supposed to function. That removes accountability. It also removes transparency. Projects will no longer appear in public meeting packets. That means no public hearings, no visibility, and no opportunity for residents to understand or question developments in their own neighborhoods. This is not modernization. This is exclusion. There has been talk about Act 16, which may limit local discretion on some compliant residential projects, but that is not the same as giving one city official broader control over zoning decisions. Those are two separate issues. The question is whether Sheboygan is going beyond what state law requires and shifting too much power away from elected officials and the public. Just because a state law changed for certain residential developments does not automatically justify a full zoning rewrite that concentrates more authority in city staff. Citizens expect checks and balances. No one person should have unilateral control over development decisions in this city. So I ask you, what is the benefit of removing oversight from elected officials and the public? This model is highly unusual and frankly dangerous. You have the authority to stop this, and you should. And are we allowed questions? It said in the packet we were allowed questions.
You may ask questions within your 3 minutes.
So yes or no, would a data center be approved by the zoning administrator alone as an as-of-right use if it meets the qualifications in this zoning ordinance on an industrial zone parcel?
That will be addressed later. That specific question with data centers, as of tonight, it's being addressed tonight.
Say that again?
That data centers will be addressed tonight, later this evening. We're writing down the questions right now, and we're going to address them individually. Thank you. Next.
Frank Polzan. Frank?
Sure, be quick. Be quick, yep. Yes. Here, do you just want to?
Liz is getting.
Okay, there we go. All right. Okay. Unfortunately, two of these copies have a little coffee stain at the bottom. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
No disrespect.
Right.
Okay. Thank you very much. My name is Frank Kozan.
Oh, go to the.
2829 Erie Avenue, a resident of Sheboygan, 50 years. When I first came here in 1975, they were building a fountain on 8th Street. The fountain was to memorialize the 200th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. It is confusing to me that on the eve of the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, there is a proposal to invest in the piece in Fountain Park that would eliminate that fountain. The grandchildren living today should live to see the 300th anniversary, and if this fountain is eliminated, they would not know that we memorialized the 200th anniversary only to abolish that memorial in the 250th anniversary. So I think it's ironic and uncalled for. I've passed out a handout. I wish I had one for everybody. If the alders will please take a look at the back side. There is a picture, I'll describe to the people, of a man standing in a chasm in the earth that has been split apart by the earthquake. He could extend both arms, and there he would barely touch the sides. And above it, it says, earthquakes really do split the earth, not just shake it. There's a reason for that, because if you look at the other side, you will see our fountain, the current fountain, and I have written a few lines of text. The jagged, irregular basins represent the power of an earthquake, ripping the earth apart. The Declaration of Independence was a force that would shatter monarchies and empires. The forceful gushing spray of water, we're all familiar with that. You've all seen it. Perhaps you were puzzled by it the way I was until I understood what the landscape architect was trying to drive at. That gushing water is the opposite of genteel, graceful, streaming arcs, and it represents the upwelling of the spirit of freedom and the unleashing of its power that would reject monarchs and authoritative societies.
The fountain is a representation of an event so cataclysmic that it shattered the structures of societies that repressed the human spirit, and the world would never be the same again. The colonists said to England, "No more from your king, no more from your parliament. Besides, you're 2,000 miles away." They had the nerve to do that. And the architect who designed this fountain said, "I'm not designing something that memorializes the document that's under glass in Washington, not Independence Hall, not..."
Frank, that's
Yeah.
3 minutes.
Okay, thank you.
You.
So,
All right. Thank you, Frank.
you're welcome.
Mark Mahoney.
Hello, Mark Mahoney, 832 North 6th Street, Sheboygan. The last time I spoke here, I talked about balance, the need to have a balance as decisions are made. And I just want to speak briefly on one balance issue. Certainly, everyone would agree that the city is aggressive about development and building. But on the other side, when we talk about balance, my interest is making sure that the interest in development and growth is restricted by those areas where we don't want development. And those would be the environmentally sensitive areas. And I know we have those mapped out, which is fine, and that should continue. But then, as I looked at the new zoning code, I looked for provisions that were in the old code, and I could not find them in the new code. And these were specific provisions in 15, 507, and 505 and 15204 that deal with woodlands, lakeshore, and wetlands. The woodland one says woodlands that remain undisturbed with any cutting limited to selective or conditional uses specifically authorized. Clear cutting is only conditionally permitted and subject to mitigation requirements. Lakeshore overlay, undisturbed lakeshore areas. Lakeshore shall remain in an undisturbed state except for extremely limited uses permitted under the ordinance. And then finally, wetlands, permanently protected green spaces. Wetlands are treated as permanently protected green space where disturbance is permitted except as specifically allowed under certain sections. So if these are still in the code, the new code, proposed code, and I've missed them, good, let me know. But if they're not in there, it'd be interesting to know why they're not showing up this time. There is a new provision, which is in 101D7, which states, protect and enhance environmentally sensitive areas, groundwater resources, and other natural resources. It's possible that is meant to replace those specific provisions that dealt with all of those three important areas. But this is so vague, protect and enhance environmentally sensitive areas. It looks like perhaps that would be a way to just get things approved that perhaps couldn't have been approved in the past. So that would be my balance issue for tonight. And again, hopefully we can look to see why those aren't in the code, or perhaps get them back in if they're missing now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mary Dotz. Mary Dotz.
Good evening. My name is Mary Dotz, Los Angeles Avenue. Dear Common Council, let's talk about what this zoning rewrite actually allows, especially when it comes to data centers. Right now, data centers are being grouped into a broad industrial category and allowed as of right. At the same time, this new code combines multiple industrial categories, suburban, urban, and heavy, into one. That removes important distinctions and protections. We all know we cannot outright ban data centers if they meet zoning criteria, but we can regulate them, and we should. Other communities are doing exactly that. We can require developers to pay for grid upgrades, water and sewer expansion, and road improvements, so taxpayers are not subsidizing private projects. We can enforce strict noise limits with decibel caps like Virginia, limit evaporative cooling by requiring air-cooled systems to reduce water like Mesa, Arizona, and mandate on-site wastewater treatment before discharge like Quincy, Washington, and Phoenix. We can also set architectural design standards. And most importantly, we can require conditional use approvals like Chicago, so projects must go through Plan Commission, Common Council, and public review. That gives you legal discretion to say no when a project does not align with our community goals. But this draft removes that discretion. So I have some questions if any of you want to answer within my 3 minutes. Where is the moratorium while we study this? Anyone? Good.
I'd like to answer that. I've been trying to get one passed or get one put in front of the council for several months.
No. Graveen, this is attendee participation. We will answer these questions after.
Where are the protections for Lake Michigan, our drinking water? Why were environmental safeguards stripped out from the current version? Why were we removed from Green Tier and Sustainability Task Force dissolved? And where is the redlined version of this ordinance compared to our current one? Where are the supporting documents that were supposed to be compiled by Elise Rose to start this zoning rewrite as required by the ordinance itself? These are not small questions. These are foundational. And you can fix this. City Council, you can stop this, and you must. Thank you.
Thank you.
Julie Felbab? Felbab?
Julie, name and address, please.
My name is Julie Felbab, 119 Menominee Drive.
All right, you have 3 minutes.
These comments are for the committee of the whole meeting. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I am here on behalf of Friends of the Black River Forest. Our attorney also sent a letter to the committee of the whole outlining our concerns in more detail. Please ensure that letter from Pine Spock by Krista Westenberg is entered into the record and you get a copy. We appreciate that the city has pulled back on its original drafting ordinance. There are still problems with the new drafting ordinance. These are explained in the letter from our attorney. Friends of the Black River Forest has, as you know, opposed the use of land within and north of Kohler Andre State Park for a private golf course proposed by the Kohler Company. Kohler Company obtained a conditional use permit, or CUP, from the city for the golf course on November 20th, 2020, about 5.5 years ago. As you all know, construction never began on that course. After an extension was granted in 2024 that Friends of the Black River Forest and others opposed, we understand some within the city believe the CUP is in effect. This is true in spite of the fact that Kohler Company has told the city it plans major changes to the golf course, changes that are not authorized by its 2020 CUP. Some parts of this zoning ordinance change seem designed to allow Kohler to obtain a modification without going through any further city process. We don't believe that is allowed, but that is what Section 103L of the new ordinance seems designed to do. Who wrote this section? Why is it in the ordinance? Please see the letter from our attorney for further information about that and other changes that are of concern and the revisions we request. We do appreciate the new draft keeps the zoning administrator separate from the city administrator. We also have some concerns about the process. First, why isn't the comprehensive plan amendment being done before the zoning amendment takes effect? Second, can the city speed up responses to open records requests? The Friends have made multiple requests that are still outstanding, even though they would help us comment on the zoning ordinance changes. Some of these go back to last year. Third, the city should also be more clear that there will be future public comment opportunities on the zoning ordinance, including a public hearing. The letter from our attorney explains these concerns. Passing a new zoning ordinance is a significant decision for the city and people with property and environmental issues. Please make further changes to the ordinance to address our concerns and fix the process. Thank you.
Mandolin Tempest.
My name is Mandolin Tempest. I reside at 5 Beechwood Drive. The rewrite zoning ordinance adds a new industrial land use of data center without meeting meaningful regulations or performance standards regarding data centers. Proposed data center project can now consist of more than one building, can consist of more than one or more large data center structures, can occupy 30-acre to 1,000-plus acre site. The draft ordinance imposes more regulations upon animals than data centers. We are an agricultural state, and you propose more regulations on my yard and my garden than what you have even as any plan that I can find anywhere on any data center. This affects our groundwater, this affects our children, chemicals, everything. This is not something that needs to just get pushed through, and I urge you to honestly sit down and look at everything that could happen. This is all too new for us to be making any decisions on. You need regulations, and you need strong regulations. We live next to the greatest body of fresh water. That's not something to take lightly. That is a responsibility that we need to have for our generation and future generations, and I urge you all to do that. Part of the problem with the city that I have been seeing recently is that the lack of accountability, the lack of communication, and the lack of putting it in layman's terms. And that is a responsibility of our elected officials. You are elected to do that. You are elected to communicate with your constituents, and I urge you to actually answer your emails. I have been waiting for an answer from my alderman since March 9th. The previous one to that was February. The previous one to that was January. When I ask you follow-up questions, I expect to be answered. I do not expect to sit in an outbox waiting to get what? So I have to come here on my time off. Come here, miss my dinner with my family, to come here and ask you questions that could have been answered over an email. That is where the anger for your entire city is coming from. You are not listening to your people, and it needs to happen. Regulations are important, and I urge you to put referendums on votes instead of just pushing things through. Referendums are important to happen. Each person in this city has a voice, and they actually need to be heard. I urge any new landscaping and development consider mosses and clover instead of grasses. They're better for our environment. Maybe you need to look into outside of the box solutions. Thank you.
Tracy Burnett.
Good evening. My name is Tracy Brunette, and I live at 1229 North 4th Street. First, I'd like to start by thanking the city, the mayor in particular, and alders for pursuing what are considered to be housing-friendly or housing-ready policies in this new zoning code, namely legalizing accessory dwelling units, decreasing minimum lot sizes, and allowing duplex or multifamily houses. These are important steps for sustainably and incrementally increasing our housing stock, so very important for our city. Many of us would love to see these come to light, but the zoning code itself seems to be hampered by the ongoing issues that seem to be easily resolvable, many of which we've heard here this evening. The first is consolidation of power. Again, it seems like these are things we could have within our code that would make people feel comfortable moving forward with it so that we can make sure that these important changes for things such as housing come to light in the city. So consolidation of power. The second, again, we've been hearing them all night long, are safeguards around data centers. Nothing by right? We would like to have some public discussion on this. Removal of environmental protections, and I want to commend Mark and other city members here who are speaking, because trying to figure out what it said in the old code and what it said in the new code is no small feat. It's been really, really difficult to try to do that. I'm trying to follow it, but it's been really hard to do that. So that's something, so every citizen here should be commended for trying to follow along. It's not easy at all. And the third one is, the removal of environmental protections, and then again, just communicating in layman's terms was mentioned before, but just making sure that for us citizens who are trying really hard to be engaged, just making it easier to do so. And I know it would even be easier for the alders. I know it hasn't been easy for you either to try to track like what's in the old code and what's in the new code. So we're all on the same team trying to get this right for the city. So thank you where it's due, but also we can do better for our citizens all around. Thank you.
Mary Lynn Donahue.
Thank you. My name is Mary Lynn Donahue. I live at 418 St. Clair Avenue in Sheboygan. I have 3 points. The first is, and building on what Tracy Brunette said, the zoning code process has been what the Scots call a clish-maclaver. It's a big fat mess. It is very difficult for those of us who are interested to trace the old code, the changes, the new changes, the changes after that. Perhaps there has not been this kind of community interest in zoning codes, and the consultant is not used to it, but use this as a lesson in how you can clearly put out and explain really complicated issues. Number two, that has to happen within the context of the comprehensive plan. Number two, the provisions in the current proposed code for AI data centers are laughably inadequate. I'm so glad to hear from Attorney Majerus that there's going to be additional time for discussion of really important issues. AI data centers are, to me, a bit of irrational exuberance. If they do come to our community, they need to come with very specific protections. We know this from our friends in Port Washington who now have had to shut down construction at night because of the incredible noise and light pollution. The third piece, the third point, and this is a tough one, you've lost our trust. It seems as if we don't trust anything that comes out of the city. And I'm not speaking about alders, but about staff and consultants. Trust is so hard to build, and it takes a long time to build it. When you do that, when you build that trust, sadly, it doesn't take much to make it go away. Now, the good news is, for the city, there are certain specific things that you can do to begin to rebuild that trust. The first is a moratorium on AI data construction until the zoning code is implemented with approval. I understand we have an alderperson who is working on that, and that's something that you can clearly just step forward and do to begin to reestablish trust. Excuse me. You can enact an ordinance or a resolution banning non-disclosure agreements. This is this is a basic step forward. These are new and they are destructive to the democratic process. My time is almost up, but those are two clear ways that you can start to rebuild that trust. I would urge you to do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Liz Mentink. Liz?
All right, Liz, name and address, and then you have 3 minutes.
Liz Mentink of 2109 David Avenue.
Thank you.
Probably not quite as reformed as, formal as most of the other people here. I don't necessarily have anything super written out in front of me and planned, but it concerns me, and maybe I'm not as knowledgeable about a lot of these things, and I want to fully acknowledge that. But it seems that there's to be quite a bit of power invested in a single individual here, and giving a lot of power to one person to regulate what I can do on my land. And I hear, wanting to increase the ability of being able to build houses, which is awesome, but also if you're going to regulate what people are doing with their houses, in terms of landscaping, in terms of animals that I have in my yard, that's of deep concern to me personally as a lower class individual. Me and my husband spent years saving our money up to buy our house, and to build up a large garden in our yard that both supports us financially in terms of being able to feed my young daughter here, and I'm soon going to have another baby, be able to feed our family healthy food that would be a lot more difficult for us to buy. With the economy being what it is right now, it's very concerning to me to hear, a couple months ago there was a proposal to bring down the amount of garden space you could have in your front yard to 25%. My whole front yard is garden space. I've spent a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of effort over the years that we've had our house into what is an investment. It cost us money up front for what I thought was going to be years and years of being able to make sure that no matter what the economic conditions are, that my family would be fed well. And not only that, but in my adventures of growing our garden and the number of people that I've met, the community that I've built, the interactions I've had with people. You talked about neighborliness in terms of building porches and things. My garden has been a way for me to reach out to people, meet people, build community. And it would be, my daughter loves going out in the garden and being able to just grow her own food and see, we have native plants too, and with the environmental destruction going on at large around the world, being able to have some native plants where she can see the caterpillars feeding on, the milkweed and...
Liz, you're over 3 minutes.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Kimberly Meller.
Kimberly Meller, 515 Columbus Avenue, Sheboygan. Thank you, Common Council. I'm going to speak about my dislike of large-scale data centers. The only true employment impact on one municipality will be in the construction, but it is only if a deal is struck in a way that guarantees all subcontracted firms are locally owned. The Ohio River Valley Institute, a policy think tank that analyzes data center and energy projects throughout Appalachia and the Northeast, published data in 2025 to demonstrate that employees-data centers started at 20.4, employees to data centers started at 20.4 in 2015, around the time data centers were an emergent market. In 2024, full year numbers show a data center has an average of 10 employees. When we talk about long-term direct employment impact, a data center is not a shining example of long-term. Indirect employment impact is largely temporary. It takes a finite time to construct a data center. Local construction firms, unless specified in the contract with the municipality, have no right to win a subcontract award. They must bid with large competitors from neighboring states who are fully equipped and hungry to win those awards. Therefore, indirect construction employment is not likely to result in substantial tax-based growth. The Sheboygan Power Plant is more likely to see job growth with more than 10 employees as compared to a data center. Ineffective tax incentives do not deliver promised economic benefits. Residents take on the incremental operating costs of the facility, while profits are extracted to mega corporations who are incorporated outside the state of Wisconsin. Those 10 full-time employees aren't going to increase the taxable base of the municipality more than the residents will be subsidizing the data center. Energy prices will rise unless the deal is constructed in a way that removes residents from being on the hook, at which point the locale is no longer attractive to the business proposition. Time and time again, data center investment ultimately results in 2 to 5 times the energy costs for residents and no net gains for the community. If everyone is paying $60 to $300 a month more in incremental energy fees, what the hell good is any tax incentive that doesn't exceed multiple thousands per year per household?
Kimberly, you're over 3 minutes.
The math is a no matter bad how you look at it.
You're over 3 minutes, Kimberly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Roseanne Brandt.
All right, Roseanne, name, address, and then you have 3 minutes.
Roseanne Brandt, 1829 North 27th Place, Sheboygan.
Thank you.
I've got a first question is, Von Bryson submitted a contract on October 11th, 24 with a project scope and a budget for the zoning ordinance rewrite. What is the resolution number for the date of that? And it was a $60,000 to $70,000 contract that was supposedly approved by the Common Council. Who authorized that expense? That's the first question I have. And the second, yes or no, would this new zoning ordinance take away the Plan Commission and Common Council's authority to vote on future private sector developments of commercial, industrial, and residential or mixed-use projects? And the last thing I wanted to say, what she was talking about with our alderman, I've been trying to get a hold of mine, Ryan, and if I call your number that they gave me, they say, what is the extension? How the hell do I know? It doesn't say your name, your number is this. Could you help me out with that?
Yes, it's so long.
Thank you.
Drew Phillips. Drew?
All right, Drew, name, address, and then you'll have 3 minutes.
Yep, thank you. Name's Drew Phillips. I live at 928 Wisconsin Ave. I have a little mix of some positive and some constructive feedback. I really appreciate the city trying to listen. I've noticed more communication happening over the past few months on social media, public forums like this one, and the comprehensive plan that I attended. And so an example of the city trying to improve at the comprehensive plan, people complained that the city wasn't taking notes, and now the city announced they're taking notes. So thank you for listening. So good job. Still more work to do, but thank you for those efforts so far. I also appreciate all the alders, city staff, and citizens who really care. Thank you so much. So I hope keep up the caring. I love it. Love to see it. So. Some positives, I think, from the new zoning code is it's great to see efforts to allow more housing to be built organically and by right, and modifications to be made to existing housing. The examples in the presentation were very good, so thank you for that. I think these efforts to reduce minimum lot size, setback requirements, increasing areas that allow duplexes, triplexes, and ADUs by right can help increase housing affordability for Sheboyganites. I have moving on to some constructive feedback, I have a slight definition concern for the data centers. It seems that the data center definition in the current zoning code seems to match any building that has any sort of networking equipment whatsoever. I teach computer science at Sheboygan Area School District. I have a server in my classroom. I'm sure the Sheboygan Area School District has servers downtown here. Other local businesses have servers in their office. And I think that would match the definition for data center in the current zoning code. And I I think what people are more worried about is a much larger use case. So I just don't want those people and local businesses to be unnecessarily burdened by that definition. I don't know if they are. I'm just raising that concern. So, and lastly, so I've been talking to a lot of neighbors. I am running for local office. I've been talking to a lot of neighbors, and opposition of data centers is like super bipartisan. Like pretty much everybody agrees, including myself. And I think expressly prohibiting any data center by right is a great way to help get the good things in the zoning code passed and also reflect the will of Sheboyganites. So thank you.
Thank you.
Rebecca Clark.
All right, Rebecca, name, address, and you get 3 minutes.
Rebecca Clark, 735 Fairway Drive, 195 pages. This is going to be hard. But I just wanted to say the one thing that always occurred to me was I never understood the reason for the entire zoning code rewrite. We never got staff recommendations. I know you were talking about redoing the code for years, but to redo the whole code is a big deal. And the reason that it got so contentious is that you were going to do it without a public hearing. That's what was happening in January. And we gotcha, and we stopped it. But in the letter from Von Briesen, and Sam, it's good to see you. You've haunted my dreams. In the letter from Von Briesen, they promised to do a bunch of public hearings and stuff to coincide with the comprehensive plan, but that is not, in fact, what happened. And I do not understand why, as was addressed, Diane McGinnis-Casey, and I will be doing a public records request on those emails from September of 24, why would she go and get money from your capital improvement plan, $60,000, to hire Bay Lakes, and then turn around and request another $60,000 for Van Briesen to do a code rewrite that would supersede the comprehensive plan for an entire year? That makes no sense. That makes no sense. The point is, the statement that you do not update your code is false. That is totally false. In fact, in 2020, you redid a lot of Chapter 105. In fact, you had an ordinance which you passed to change the residency requirements for the Architectural Review Board. They no longer had to be a city resident. You passed it. So all this talk you said about we need to get rid of architectural review because we cannot find a quorum is false. You also updated the code back in 2020 to accommodate Act 67, which changed conditional use permits. You changed your planning commission to deal with those uses. So we're worried now about Act 16. You can amend the code. You better invite us. You better have a public hearing, but we can amend things as needed. Now, I'd like to go through page by page. But I think the issue is, as has already been stated, what would have been helpful, not just for me, but also for your plan commission, is to do this in a side-by-side comparison of the codes that we currently have and the codes that are changing. Because I can tell you right now, the preamble in the codes that you have online is really good, and I'd hate to lose it. It talks very eloquently about your comprehensive plan and how these things need to be tied together. The other issue is page 6, notices. I'd like that paragraph torn out. If the city staff writes a bad public hearing notice, you're basically saying we are not responsible, we can go ahead with the hearing anyway. Throw that out. I'm also asking that you keep the plan commission's powers as they are, okay? Not just with the Wisconsin statutes that's in the code right now. I know I'm out of time. If anyone else doesn't want to speak, I can keep going, but thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Peter Jacobs.
All right, Peter, name, address, and you'll have 3 minutes.
My name is Peter Jacobs, and I'm at 930 Meade Avenue. This rewrite is destructive to the democratic process of municipal government. The rewrite is neither a cleanup or streamlining. Significant regulatory authority is stripped from the elected officials with no discernible disclosure, frank discussion, or valid cause. The ordinance fails to uphold fundamental purpose of zoning. It provides no further protection of health, safety, and public welfare of your constituents. The city residents. The draft, I have 9 points here that the way this draft ordinance is presented to you. Number 1, it's presented to you as a done deal on the council agenda for approval as of January 5th, 2026. It was resubmitted as a revised rewrite last week, all done without public forum disclosing content and purpose of significant proposed ordinance changes. Number 2, it's presented to you without frank disclosure. The new ordinance strips the authority of both the Plan Commission and the City Council to oversee planning approvals and architectural plan review approvals for all commercial, industrial, and multifamily projects, including all TID subsidized multifamily projects, the Amazon project, the Kohler Golf Course project, and yes, any future data center projects. Number 3 is presented to you, and we've talked about this multiple times here tonight, without a red line of ordinance changes to plainly identify each ordinance regulatory change or addition, to flag every authority and approval changes, as mandated by the current zoning ordinance, the requirements for amending zoning ordinance. Number 4, it's presented to you without any planning department memorandum confirming validity of proposed changes to regulations and administrative authority. Planning department is actually failing to follow its own ordinance mandated procedural requirements. Number 5, it's presented to you without document deliverables, as Von Briesen noted in their fee proposal of October 2024, which is required for full understanding of all proposed changes. Von Briesen did not include a report summary of all regulation and authority changes in the agenda packet. No multiple public forum meetings for discussion of proposed changes.
Peter, you're over 3 minutes.
Pardon me?
You're over 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Robin Brox.
All right, Robin, name, address, and then you'll have 3 minutes.
My name's Robin Brox. I live at 415 Niagara Avenue. And I have not lived in Sheboygan a long time. I chose to live here because of Lake Michigan. So if you screw Lake Michigan with these data centers, I just don't see how you can live with yourselves. Also, smile more. You're representing us. You all look so unhappy to be here. You look grumpy and bored, and you have had side conversations while we have been speaking. Don't think we haven't noticed. You work for us. Citizens of Sheboygan do not want a zoning. Citizens of Sheboygan do not want a zoning czar. We want a committee. We want a planning committee. We want two separate committees that can work together, because that's how it's done. Not a single person having all this authority and then us getting told, oh no, you'll still vote on it. You're not going to vote on most of it. It's all going to be hidden. And innocent people are going to be harmed, because who can afford to live in Sheboygan anymore? Where are all the people coming from when there's nowhere to live? We need homes that cost $100,000, not $400,000. We need homes for the homeless. Homes for the homeless. We need homes for people that are non-white and working class. And those people vote. They might not be here in droves tonight, but they're listening. We're all paying attention. And we're all really, really disappointed. Profoundly disappointed. If you don't want to serve the people, resign.
Thank you.
Judy Poole.
All right, Judy, name, address, and then you'll have 3 minutes.
Okay. My name's Judy Poole, and I live at 18 Ashwood Drive in Sheboygan. I probably have a different political point of view than most of the people in this room right now. However, I have found that I have 10% in common with them, which is enough to join together to address the city of Sheboygan issues that are important to both sides of the aisle. I have had the pleasure of sitting down and hearing about and discussing the history of the comprehensive plan and reasons why it is all of a sudden so important to get passed. I have read the entire red line version of the newly introduced zoning code, even though I don't understand most of it. I've sought out and listened to people who have knowledge and experience with these issues, along with the possibility of data centers coming to our area in the future. I attended the Bay Lakes presentation at Town Social, a spot in town I have never been to before. I realize everyone who spoke against the zoning being changed at this time had their own reasons for speaking against the plans, myself included. However, I now feel I have made several new friends. We may soon have completely opposite views on some upcoming issues, but I feel comfortable enough now to sit down over coffee or a Diet Coke and discuss our differences with no animosity. Tonight I feel it is important for the mayor, planning commission, and common council alders to realize these are not nonpartisan issues. Many on the far left, far right, and in between love the city and are wanting the best for it for our residents and our families. When we join together, this is a formidable force that should not be ignored. Consider holding off on these issues and consider not passing the zoning code in whole at this time. Amendments can always be made as we go. Resolutions can be offered and passed or denied. Thank you.
Maeve Quinn.
All right, Maeve, name, address, and then you'll have 3 minutes.
Maeve Quinn, and my address is 310 St. Clair here in Sheboygan. Good evening, and thank you for really allowing us this time to share our concerns and questions. I personally think that slowing down this process and really listening and incorporating our feedback really helps rebuild the trust that was mentioned in an earlier comment. To be honest with all of you, I have never really thought that much at all about city zoning ordinances. And in light of the ones that you're sort of looking at, some of which are over 30 years old, one can understand the need for an update. Our current ordinances does not mention any regulation whatsoever for a large AI data center. They just didn't really exist 30 years ago. So due to what quickly happened in a community south of us, this may be a reason why some citizens are here tonight. If you in this room are concerned about the potential of having a future large AI data center in Sheboygan, just quietly raise your hand, please. Thank you. In addition to my concern of the current city ordinance having no regulations for the large AI data center, I personally don't feel like I have the right background to share any advice of what should be in a new city zoning ordinance in order to protect a city from an AI data center. And this really concerns me. So I can't really offer you good feedback other than I'm concerned. I'm also really concerned that it seems as though some of the regulations in the current city ordinance have been changed or removed, but they're not noted on the two documents that were attached to the agenda. And so it's really confusing. For example, and I think it's been mentioned by several people tonight, the city website has a whole section, Article 105.6, Natural Resource Protection, on details regarding environmental protections for lakeshore protection, wetland protections, and public parks. And I can't find this information anywhere on the agenda that you have tonight, and that concerns me. And if that information has been removed, I really should see it on your document in red, and then if you have what you're going to replace it with, that should be in yellow, and I just don't see that anywhere. And then my final point is I do share some of the concerns about who is making some of the decisions. The version of the zoning ordinance shared tonight has very little mention of the Planning Commission. I actually counted it. It's 5 sentences. So I want to know if their oversight, authority, and responsibility has been reduced with this new zoning ordinance. And what about Common Council? I personally really appreciate having a citizen board for oversight. And in contrast, the new Zoning Board of Appeals has numerous paragraphs detailing its role. And I think it would be good to have a very similar format for the Planning Commission in your ordinances. I do understand the need to be more efficient with some of the city zoning ordinances. There have been some really good suggestions made in this one, especially with some of the housing and the ADUs. There have been things that people have been asking for, and it has been detailed, and I'm grateful for that. But I think it would have been good to have some better understanding of what items will always come before the citizen-appointed Planning Commission rather than just approved by city staff.
Maeve, you're over 3 minutes.
Okay,
Thank
well,
you.
in perfect conclusion. Thank you.
Dave Rapinski.
Mine's a little different.
Dave, name, address, and then you get your 3 minutes.
Do you want me to go through everything? Taylor, you want me to go through everything?
Dave, I need your name, address.
David Rapinski.
3 minutes.
835 Indiana Avenue. I own Dave's Who's In. I came to the city hall about a year ago to get a building permit, and I went through all of the stuff to do it, and they kind of were dismissive to me, put me off, and then on my permit, they wrote porch. So my building inspector was supposed to come by and see the final print. I can show you the print I brought. I can show the final print. I can tell you what I was told to do and did it. Anyway, now they tell me I got to tear my building down. I did everything I was told, beyond everything I was told, and now it looks like you guys are going to change the code to make it work anyway.
they didn't, they used a 515 rule on me, and the only thing I knew at the time was a 5-foot rule to the lot line, and anyway, I figured there'd be a compromise if it came anything closer, but I didn't. On one side, it was there already, and when you try to explain everything to, you can tell how I talk. I'm used to training people that are young, so I talk and talk and over-talk, and I was treated dismissively. I was expected to have my building inspector come in, and I gave him the code to the front door, and I work a little later than most people, early in the morning, so my afternoon starts about 4 o'clock after I get done doing my regular stuff. And I've been working on this house for about a year now. Now they tell me to tear it down. And it almost feels like it's, yeah, it's ridiculous. I'm just telling you, thank you. It's more than ridiculous. It's almost prejudice. Every time I come in front of you guys, I'm telling you, it's a battle. It should be. I walked out of the city hall that day, I'm thinking, man, this went out pretty good. They're just gonna come over and take care of it, tell me what I gotta do, and I did it. Tell me, dig a ditch on both sides of the property line, put the drain tile in, fill it with stone, I did it. They told me, I wrote it down, but they told me other things. I did all of those things, and now, this week, Drew tells me, you gotta tear it down. I had one dissenting because they understood. I did your process. I did everything, and I'm doing it myself, so it takes a little longer. The last time I talked to my building inspector, he says, Dave, when the walls are up, let me know. So that's what I've been doing, just doing it myself, taking my time. They gave me my permit here a couple of weeks back, and then they tell me, no, you can't, you gotta tear it down. I didn't get my permit rescinded, but you gladly charged me $600 for it. It just, this whole process that you guys do is really, as you can tell with all of these people that are going through the same thing. If that is the case that you still want me to tear it down, I want a quasi-judicial hearing. I also want the same that Drew Phillips's committee told me I had to tear it down. Just give me the recording of it so I can take care of that. And I guess I'll take care of it. But there's no way I'm gonna tear that down. It's beautiful. It looks good in the neighborhood.
Thank you. Anyone else?
No one else has signed up.
All right. So the way that we're going to do this is first, we're going to talk about the data center. And I'm also going to announce right now that not during this council session, but the 26-27 council year, so starting after April 20th, there will be another committee of the whole for the data centers. Well, data centers ordinance. We're going to start with the data center, so you want to just address?
Yes. So there was a question posed about, as it stands now in the current ordinance that's being proposed, if a data center were proposed, would it be authorized? As it's currently written, yes. The question that I posed to council leadership, staff discussed this at length. One of the discussion points that we had was brought up, at what point do they become a data center, that hyperscale that everybody's concerned about, versus what exists in our community right now. We've got buildings that qualify as data centers throughout the community. AT&T's got 2 a block from here. So addressing, trying to thread that needle of what kind of addresses what everybody's concerned about, but still offers that opportunity to regulate or not hamper existing businesses. So we've got a couple different definitions throughout that ordinance. And one of the recommendations was that not looking at this just as data centers, but looking at one of the questions that was brought up, how do we address issues that come up on things that don't even exist right now? So we know data centers are a large concern, but at what point is there a break point that we automatically require a public hearing and a public discussion on every type of project regardless? So staff didn't feel comfortable that we make a recommendation directly in the ordinance. We wanted to have that discussion at council. Obviously, the feedback here helps with that. You know, we're talking somewhere between, 50 to 100,000 square feet. Any project that exceeds that would need a public hearing regardless of type, regardless of where it falls in at. So that would be something that staff is, would like council to make that decision, that recommendation that gets worked in. But requiring a hearing on any project over a specific size, regardless of what district it is or what type of project it is. And that would help address a lot of the concerns about projects that don't even exist at this point in time.
All right, now we'll move on to questions that the attendees asked. Do we have a list? All right, Attorney Majerus, start from the top and then we will direct accordingly.
All right, so Administrator Bradley just spoke to the first question posed by Lisa Salgado. Would a data center be allowed as of right by the city administrator? I will clarify that the city administrator is not the assigned staff person. The current zoning code assigns decision-making authority to the zoning administrator, and that's what this current proposal does. Sam or Taylor, if you'd like to speak further on this question, or I'll move to the next one.
Sam?
Yeah, I just wanted to note as well that I think it was posed in the question, but the assumption is that also in this circumstance where staff is approving that use, the land would have to be comprehensively planned to permit it. It would have to be zoned to permit it. Those are both decisions that happen at the council, Plan Commission recommendation and the council level. It would have to meet all the development standards that are in here, or you choose to amend as you see fit over time. And then I also wanted to make sure that the public is aware that there are oftentimes other kind of wraparound agreements in relation to very large uses, not just data centers, but other types of industrial uses that I think are important and would come to the council level. Those could be development agreements, those could be public improvement agreements, those could be utility agreements. All of those are worthy policy discussions. I heard some discussion here tonight from the public on considerations for economic incentives or things. Those don't really take place in the zoning code, but are, other conversations that you can have separately. But I just wanted to call out, like, all of those decisions would still be made at the council level. The only thing the staff would be doing in that circumstance is clarifying whether, the proposed development meets all the adopted ordinances as the council adopts them.
Thank you. Next question.
The next question is specific to natural resource protection regulations. The question was asked in a couple of different formats, so I'll go with Mr. Mahoney's version. Where are the regulations dealing with woodlands, lakeshore, and wetlands?
All right, Sam?
Sure, I can take those. Our intent was to consolidate those within a cumulative natural resource protection overlay district. So when any of those scenarios came up, that overlay zone would be the trigger applied on the zoning map to review any of the environmental concerns. So our intent was not to take anything out. It was just to consolidate it under a single district, which mostly from a mapping purpose is clearer to see when those overlay protections would or would not take place on the map. I should also note that shoreline zoning and floodplain zoning are separate chapters under your ordinance, which this does not address, but are separately enforceable by the city as well.
Next.
The next question is whether the city will be imposing a moratorium on data centers.
I think that would be more of a Alonza. I'll let you speak to that. Sorry, Alder Green.
It's all good. Shortly after Madison put a moratorium in place, news shot around the state that this was a possibility. Before that, we were told bans weren't allowed. So I began drafting, with the help of Liz, a moratorium, but we put it underneath the wrong statutes. So we had a lot of work put into it, and we had to yank it back. We do have another current one in the works, but because we're so close to election, it'll probably be after the election to make sure we have it in front of the current council.
Thank you. Next.
Where are protections for Lake Michigan?
That go back to, who wants to take that, Sam?
Generally, floodplain and shoreline protections are housed in a separate chapter of the Code of Ordinances. So again, it wasn't our intent to take out any environmental protections here. Additionally, I'll note, kind of building off one of the comments, this code actually has more objective standards to require native landscaping, looking at pre-settlement conditions in the Sheboygan area and mandating that specific percentages of the landscaping provided is within those plant species. It also does not allow non-native grasses in most circumstances for landscaping treatments. So I kind of in line with that, but directly in relation to Lake Michigan regulations, those are generally housed in the shoreline zoning chapter, which this rewrite didn't address.
I'll supplement that. The floodplain zoning can be found on Chapter 107 of the Sheboygan Municipal Code. The shoreland wetland zoning can be found in Chapter 109. The general zoning code is Chapter 105.
Sam?
Those standards are pretty set by state law, so the city doesn't have a lot of leeway in how they can adopt floodplain or shoreland. They're pretty prescriptive from the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources and state statute.
All right, next.
This question doesn't necessarily relate to zoning, but why were we removed from green tier, and why was the sustainability task force dissolved?
So the Sustainability Task Force, you'll have to ask Mayor Sorensen. That was his committee, and he set that up. We don't have any part in that. So that would be a Mayor Sorensen question, and he is currently in Japan. So I would reach out to him. Now, as far as...
The other question relates to green tier.
who wants that? I don't know.
I don't know.
That...
I have not been involved with Green Tier. I believe the mayor was handling that. I think you were working on it with him, so I'm not familiar. I don't know if Taylor's got any input on that.
Director Zeiner?
I know that our office has talked to Fred Chinook with the Green Tier Group, so that's something that we actively talk to him on various projects and things of that nature, but I would echo the sentiment that this is something that the mayor was leading.
So this would be a follow-up for the mayor. So I'm not going to allow questions just because that'll open up a whole thing, and we all have daytime, most of us have daytime jobs. So next.
The next question is, where is the red line comparing this document with the current code? I can try to speak to that, at least to start. The changes to the zoning code are comprehensive and impact every section within the code. It would not be feasible to try to identify where every sentence was either readdressed in the current code or added to or eliminated. So I don't know if Taylor or Sam want to add anything to that.
All right, next.
The next question is, why did Bay Lakes get hired and then Von Briesen to rewrite the code? I think the Bay Lakes hiring is specific to the comp plan, and I believe Taylor already spoke to that.
Director Zeiner?
Nothing much more to add. Thank you for those that attended the comprehensive plan open house on Thursday. As mentioned there and echoed tonight, Director Diane McGinnis-Casey has chosen Bay Lake Council or Bay Lake Regional Planning. That's how the consultant was chosen.
Thank you.
That concludes the questions. The rest were just comments.
All right, next we will open this up to alders. That's going to be, he's going to have to talk to our planning. That, I can't really say anything to that because that's with building inspection. So that really doesn't pertain to us. So I'm going to open this up to alders. We'll have discussion, ask questions, and we'll conduct a straw poll if there's a specific change that is wanted. And if there is, staff will make that adjustment. All right, so we'll start with Alder Bors.
Just to clarify on that,
on.
so we are not doing the traditional motion and a second discussion and a vote. We will have the discussion, and if a member offers a suggestion at that point, the chair of the committee will ask for a show of hands of support for that suggestion. Staff will make note of that and then incorporate it.
Thank you. All right, Alder Bors.
Thank you, Chair. I'd initially like to revisit a couple of things with the questions that were just answered, and then I'll reserve the right to speak up again later. Regarding the environmental protections that were in zoning code and the reference made to Chapter 107 and 109, is there a reason that the environmental protections were listed in zoning code previously and now not listed in zoning code? And deforestation was mentioned, you know, in terms of clear cutting. I apologize, I don't have as thorough notes maybe, but I know there were other things that were mentioned in terms of woodland, lakeshore, and wetland that probably didn't just fall within floodplain and lakeshore for 107 and 109. So I'm just trying to understand why were they there before and now they don't exist in the new code?
Sam?
So there still is the NRP overlay, the Natural Resource Protection Overlay District in the code. We just consolidated the separate, like, wetlands and stuff all into one single overlay district. So we tried to capture all of those in a single overlay district. The intent was not to get rid of them, but to kind of concentrate them so they're more easily visible on a zoning map. But if there's anything that we missed or anything that, you know, the committee would like us to add back in, happy to do it.
Okay, so if there's specific concerns that anybody who has spoken on those topics has that they would like to share with their alders that we could follow up for additional information that should be included, please do reach out to us on that. And then the other question that I wanted to ask, specific to Von Briessen's contract for the rewrite, I know there were at least two specific questions about approval for that, what process had happened in order to approve the funds that were used for the rewrite for zoning, and if that was approved by council, at what time that was approved.
Administrator Bradley.
I'm just looking here. It looks like Diane McGinnis Casey sent a resolution approving that. October 21st, 2024.
What was the resolution number? Hold on.
Hold on. I do not have a resolution. It was sent to Attorney Adams, so I don't know if Attorney Adams approved that from there.
Attorney Majerus, do you have any knowledge of this?
No, I did not do much support for zoning
Okay.
prior.
All right, so we will work on that as far as finding out how that was done.
Okay, and if we need to
Yep.
come back to it later,
Yep.
if Administrator Bradley finds more information on it,
Yep.
I would appreciate that. I'll yield back to whoever else has questions. Thank
All
you,
right.
Chair.
Thank you. All right, Alder Perella.
Thank you, Chair. And just two things, and since it is 7:18, I'm proposing that we consider a second discussion on the same subject, the same way. And just because, as you can see, there is a lot to discuss, and we have only 10 minutes, right? So it's just,
Oh, no, that's for attendee participation. We can,
oh, perfect. Okay, perfect. So we can decide, later if that, we feel that that is, thank you for that clarification. So when I try to, it is true, it was very difficult to compare. That's common knowledge. It's very hard to compare the previous zoning code with the latest version. However, in that attempt, one thing it is clear is that for under the section of F1, F2, and large facilities, so under the factory provisions, if there is no zoning change, then that doesn't go to Plan Commission or Common Council. So that is clear. It is true. That doesn't happen. And my concern with that, which I share with many tonight, is that if a facility is, especially if it is a large-scale facility, I see that there should be a need for that, regardless if there is a zoning change or not, just because of the nature of and the impact on the community. So I would propose that we consider editing the latest version of our zoning code to incorporate one or two mechanisms that send large F1, F2, and F1, F2 large facilities and H1, which is the high hazard one, that we reverse to Plan Commission and Common Council approval. And that's because I appreciate the streamlining of very small changes for the Plan Commission, but when it comes to larger, more impactful projects, I think that is something that we should try to consider again. And about the fact that we don't want to impact very small factories necessarily, so there may be a need to define small and moderate factories, which is not done right now. If we want to distinguish between large facilities and then definitively H1 and F2 and F1 as well, these categories are all factories. It's just a matter of, again, if there is no zoning change, it doesn't go to Plan Commission and Common Council. So, but we have to find a way to not make that as, the process shouldn't be the same for the small electronic shop factory and for a large impactful project, right? So I would like to see that changed.
So are you asking for like a straw poll on that?
Yes, I am. And I apologize if I wasn't clear enough. I can try to clarify that.
Okay, so Attorney Majerus, did you get that?
All right, so we're going to break this down into.
Can I clarify that real quick?
Yes.
So kind of back to that statement we made earlier that was requested was proposed as basing it on square footage regardless of district. So whether it's an industrial or residential, if it's over a certain square footage, then it's very clear expectation to the public on what will be a public versus what could potentially be a by right based on the zoning code. So we would, from the staff level, it'd be very clear from us instead of parsing out, you know, there could be something in residential that becomes a concern for the community and a project could come in and it's over a certain size, but it's not regulated. So by looking at it by a square footage, if we say every project over 100,000 square foot, regardless of whether it's industrial or residential or commercial, it would still have to go before Plan Commission for a public hearing. That would be our recommendation.
So you are suggesting that we go just by size?
Correct, just a
regardless of the district, but go by size?
Yes.
Okay. Yep. And then that could be a good idea. However, they would not include, basically it would be based on what you're saying. For example, when it comes to factories, it would apply only to the large scale factories, except if you reduce the standard that we have right now, because a large scale factories has a standard, right? The F1, F2 doesn't, not size wise, but the large scale factory has a standard in size. So if you go with that standard, then it wouldn't capture other I mean, I think that we have to create another standard to include also those that are not as big. And also the H1, I think that when it comes to factories that have a potential for a hazard, I mean, I know that the state protects us in many ways, but I think that too, there would be value added in having it go back to the Plan Commission and Common Council, just because of the nature of the factory.
Alder Perella, in order to effectively address this, I'm going to break it down. What threshold would you like to be imposed for designating a facility as a large-scale F use?
So the large scale is already has a standard.
Are you suggesting that that be changed?
No, not on the large scale. I'm suggesting that, it goes back to Plan Commission and Common Council, even if there is no zoning change.
Okay, so the first recommendation is to amend the large-scale F use regulations to allow for Plan Commission and Common Council approval. If you support this recommendation to require large-scale F uses to be referred to Plan Commission, please raise your hand.
All right.
How many?
All.
Okay. The next suggestion is to create a middle-scale F-use regulation tier.
That is correct. In order to capture that too through the same process.
So we currently treat one cap as 1 acre and the other cap is 100,000 square feet. What range would you suggest be designated mid-scale?
I would like to have the Plan Commission or even the city staff to make a suggestion on that. I can only reasonable assume that the middle ground there would make sense, but I mean a midpoint. But it is an uneducated suggestion. So either city staff helps with that suggestion and we can evaluate it now, or we refer to the Plan Commission as the expert body that can provide that.
I'm going to refer this to Director Zeinart for an idea as far as size.
Yeah, I would lean on our experts. If it's, just to clarify, you're looking for something that's under 1 acre or larger than 1 acre?
It would be over an acre, but under 100 square feet. What do we consider to be a mid-size F-use scale, mid-scale?
I think if you did 1,000 to 50,000, Sam, I don't know if you have thoughts as well.
Sam?
Yeah, I can see where you're going. I guess my follow-up question is, what is the intent of how you'd like to regulate that? So when we're creating a new use category, like what's the goal in that? Is that's my question. And then I can follow up with a recommendation.
So per the latest version of the zoning code, regardless of size, in F1, F2, large facility, and H1 are not, if there is no zoning change, are not going to be evaluated or voted upon by city plan, Plan Commission and Common Council. And since I would like to have that procedure being in place for factories, I want though to eliminate the very small ones. So I don't want to have the burden on the Plan Commission for small factories. But so there is the very large one and the very small one. So I'm considering that if we create a moderate size, and that's just a suggestion, I'm just, trying to come up with a solution so that we then apply the same procedure that we apply for the large facilities also to a mid-size facility in which even if there is no zoning change, that goes to Plan Commission and to Common Council for review.
I gotcha. I understand. So I think the way the current ordinance reads is that, or based on your action, those high hazard and large-scale F uses would go. So I think the cleanest way would be to consider the large F uses and the high hazard uses. We can write the administrative procedures to take those to Plan Commission and Common Council as you decide. And then kind of leave everything else as is, which should capture the small to medium-sized ones under the current procedures. So I don't know that you need to make a change for the everything else because you're kind of capturing everything in the large-scale F use and high hazard use situation.
Sam, for that, are you suggesting that we modify the square footage for the definition of a large scale?
I think right now they're pretty well dialed in. I mean, 100,000 square feet is not a large distribution facility, so I would say it's a pretty low low standard to qualify as a large scale F use. You know, just that 20 acres, greater than 5 acres of outdoor storage or mechanical equipment yards, including data centers and large scale computer processing uses. F uses that have greater than 50% lot coverage. So I think we're capturing like a pretty broad base of factory type uses that under this change would have to go to Plan Commission and Common Council for review. I've reviewed a lot of industrial developments. I think anything that wouldn't qualify for that would be pretty small scale, which I think the Alder is trying to protect those from needing to go through extra review steps. So
that is correct, yes. It's just that in my reasoning, it seems that maybe there should be a middle ground there, that there is the fact that there is no definition for what it is medium, I mean, concerns me a little bit. If we can proceed with that, with a straw poll on that, and if there is interest, we can look at possible size determination and definition for that. I think that's a possibility.
So that I'm clear, there currently is a size threshold of 100,000 square feet. Are you suggesting a different threshold?
No, I'm suggesting to create a threshold that captures a size which is a middle size between the very small one and the very large one, which doesn't exist. Maybe for good reasons, as Sam explained, but I would like to investigate that a little bit more. So I'm suggesting that there is a middle size is created. I'm not suggesting to change the threshold size for the large facility.
Okay, so the question for the group is whether staff should develop a mid-scale F-use regulation or whether, I'll keep it at that for now. We can do part 2 of the question. So would you support the development of a mid-scale F-use regulation?
Show of hands. Council. Sure. So then what would be? 3. Yeah. 4. 7.
All right, so the follow-up question to that is, does this regulation for mid-scale F uses substantially mirror the regulations for large-scale F uses, assuming that large-scale F uses will be required to go to Plan Commission?
Yes, so then the second part of that would be to create to follow the same procedure, meaning that even if there is no zoning change, that goes back to Plan Commission and Common Council. In other words, we would, I don't want to complicate that, that's it.
Okay, so I think my question still stands. Does the mid-scale F-use regulation substantially mirror the large-scale F-use regulation? My follow-up to that will be, does the mid-scale F-use regulation substantially differ from the large-scale F-use regulation? And
no, it wouldn't from the procedure standpoint.
I'm not referring to procedure, I'm referring to the regulations.
No, it wouldn't change.
Okay, so the suggestion for the group is that the mid-scale F-use regulation should substantially mirror the large-scale F-use regulation and should be referred to Plan Commission. Okay, I think we've covered that. Thank you.
You're next. Okay, I'm going to let Alder Decker ask a quick question on this.
I guess where are we currently with our current, as far as the smaller scale? Where are we at with, where, I don't want to make it more regulatory is my question.
Sure. So the way that the zoning code currently distinguishes between the smaller scale server rooms that Drew had referred to earlier is twofold. The first is that when data centers are secondary uses to a principal business, they're not treated the same as a hyperscale data center. They're treated as the principal use. So for example, a school district that has a large server room is not a school district plus a data center. It is a school. An insurance company with a server room is not an insurance company plus data center. It is an insurance company. We are treating in this code standalone principal use data centers. With that in mind, if it is less than an acre, it is allowed by right in all zoning districts except residential districts. Beyond that, heightened regulations apply if it is 100,000 square feet or more.
Do you want to follow up, Alder Decker?
No, I had another question after that.
All right, yeah, all right, so Alder Perla, I'll let you finish, and then I'll go to Alder Decker.
Appreciate that. Then the third part of it would be the same procedure for H1, meaning those factories that fall under H1 as those that are hazard, that present or that are deemed potentially hazardous because of their nature, then those two, I'm thinking, I would like to have that process in place as well.
Alder Perella?
Yes.
I've made a note for that. Before we move on to that topic, if we are expanding the large-scale F-use regulations to mid-size regulations, mid-size needs to be defined. Do you want that to be greater than an acre but less than 100,000 square feet, or do you want some other metric?
So as I said before, as of right now, without consulting with more experts, I would say that sounds good. However, I want to leave that open to the option that we research, that our city staff researches that subject to identify a better definition. So I'm not, unfortunately, an expert, so I cannot provide that exact size. So I would say yes, to be verified, to be researched.
So then the next question for the group is whether there is support for H1 uses being referred to Plan Commission. Show of hands, please.
Show of hands. H1 is hazardous, just so we're clear. 4, all right. All right. Anything else, Alder Perella?
Not right now, thank you.
Thank you. Alder Decker.
Yes, I'm just wondering how difficult it would be for, this is a question for Sam, I guess, is you know, to put the environmental language similar to what was in the old code. What would that be confusing? Would that make things, you know, because you said there are things that are in the code, how hard would it be to put that back into the code? Are we able to do that? And is, I guess, is for my fellow alders, is there support for that?
So first, I'll let Sam answer, and then we'll take a straw poll of that.
High level, not super difficult. We'll just want to cross-reference to make sure that there's no, what I noticed when I was going through it is it kind of restates stuff. So we'll just note when, you know, we're simplifying purely to say something once, but we're not getting rid of a regulation, that type of thing. So we can add it back in and clarify. It'll really just read as an expansion of the NRPO district as it's proposed to kind of more closely mirror some of the regulations that you have in your existing code. So to me, it's more of a semantics thing than any specific regulation would largely change. So not super difficult. We will want to work through with staff on the back end, just so you all are aware of kind of the downstream effects of your decisions. There are mapping considerations on the zoning map that this does bring up. So we'll work through, are those separate mapping overlays or same mapping overlays? And if I could make a recommendation that, let me talk to the staff GIS and how it would best appear, and then we can make a recommendation back to you all in terms of what would be clearer for the public to look at from a mapping perspective. Sometimes when you add a bunch of layers, it sounds good in text, but then when you look at it at GIS, it gets a little bit confusing. You have like 6 different layers on top of each other. So just want to make sure it's as clean as it can be.
Thank you, appreciate that.
All right, and then are you ready for?
Yeah,
Yep.
so
All right.
the question on the floor is show of hands if you support reinsertion of environmental regulations currently in the code.
All right, that's unanimous. Alder Decker, did you have anything else?
Not at this time.
All right, thank you. Alder Close.
Thank you. I'd like to circle back to the definition of a data center. We had talked about square footage, and I think a more appropriate measure would be the amount of power consumption. A typical rack. The typical rack, server rack, usually consumes about 60 kilowatt hours of power. A small data center can run from 1 to 10 megawatt hours, or megawatts, sorry. And any larger data center can go 40 megawatts all the way up to 1 gigawatt. So I'd like to see the definition of a data center start at around 1 megawatt, which is roughly about the same power consumption as a typical home in the city. I think that would cover what a data center is based on what the concerns are. Is the large-scale energy consumption is really what we're trying to get at with a lot of what the regulation is, instead of square footage. Because I fear that in prohibiting the square footage, due to the fact that these hyperscale data centers are largely unpopular, the data center, the racks might get distributed in some other way. So we still want to capture that energy consumption if it is distributed throughout the city in some other fashion.
So to be clear, the current draft distinguishes factory uses as low hazard or, low hazard, moderate hazard, and large scale. So that I can better understand how your suggestion fits in with the one previously addressed. Are you suggesting that we modify the amendment or the distinction that's currently based on square footage? You're saying eliminate that and base it on energy consumption?
I'm looking more at the data center definition towards the end. There isn't, at least from what I could read, a quantifiable amount that made it a data center, which is one of the comments that was brought up earlier. There wasn't a floor for the square footage or anything like that. So if we're going to quantify what size makes a data center, I would like to see it be energy consumption as opposed to square footage, which I.
So right now, we don't define a data center by size. We define a large-scale factory use by size, and we define a data center by the nature of the use. So would you like a?
So I'm trying to address the question that Administrator Bradley brought up earlier of how we want to define a data center based on square footage.
We could create a definition for a large-scale data center based upon square footage and energy usage.
Yeah.
And then we could incorporate that into the large-scale F use.
Yeah, I think that would be appropriate. I think using the energy consumption as a benchmark more so than the square footage would be what I'm after here.
So if we do that, then would you suggest regulations specific to large-scale data centers that are different than the regulations from the large-scale factory uses?
That are different from?
Right. So right now, I'm not trying to suppress what you're saying. I'm trying to clarify for staff to understand how to do what you're looking for. Right now, a data center, if it is 100,000 square feet, regardless of the energy usage, is subject to the large-scale regulations. We've also created, by show of hands, that a mid-size data center would be subject to the same regulations as a large data center. So that doesn't factor in energy consumption at all. It just is based upon the scope of the work, the scope of the use. So I need to know whether you are proposing regulations specific to large-scale data centers that would differ from the regulations specific to mid-size or large-scale factory uses.
Got it, I understand. So, they should be, the regulation should apply evenly among anything defined as a data center.
All right, so we have a suggestion to separately regulate large-scale data centers that are 1 megawatt. What was your?
Yeah, typically, a small data center starts at about 1 to 10 megawatts.
But is this large, middle, or small? What's the threshold?
So my intent is to capture anything that could be defined as a data center that would not necessarily fall into, per se, a school with a rack of servers.
Is your intent to address hyperscale data centers or any facility that does computing as their principal use?
Yes, my intent is to regulate any facility that does processing as a principal use.
Okay, so the.
So hold on, Alder Decker just has a question before we get to that point.
Okay. First question I got is I thought we were going to discuss data centers at a different time.
Yeah, so data centers will be discussed at a.
So why are we hashing out data centers now?
Not at this one, but we can do this right now, but just in the future for everybody on the council, in the when I am no longer here, which there will be a 26-27 council year after April 20th, there will be a second committee of the whole on data centers, specific for the zoning.
Specific for zoning, so
okay, but we'll do this one for now, but in the future, any alders talking about data centers, please refer to that future committee of the whole, and I recommend everybody come here for that one as well.
And my questions about that, I mean, I guess, and this is where I don't want to get too far into the weeds with this, but I mean, I guess, are you looking at, what about a data center that has its own power generation, so you're going to still limit that data center? Or are you taking it from the grid? So that's a question.
Center had like on-site solar and wind and that.
If they have on-site solar that they generate themselves, on-site wind, on-site whatever power generation, are we limiting them? I mean, because if you put a regulation in, you're limiting their usage, so it's taking it off the grid, or that has to be differentiated. I would think in a regulation would.
Well, I'd like to see something in using sustainable power. I think the other knock-on effects of using that amount of energy, like the cooling requirements and things like that, would necessitate us regulating those facilities.
Again, that's why I think we should wait until we all get together.
Yeah, and I apologize.
That's why I think
realized that was the intent of the future data center meeting.
I think
so just to clarify one more time, there will be a committee of the whole specifically on the data center part of this zoning ordinance after April 20th, once the new council session begins, all right?
Would you like me to move forward with the poll on this?
I will ask Alder Close.
What's the question? Sorry.
Alder Close.
Yeah, we can hold it until we have a broader discussion and we have better definition, so that we can better define the megawatt usage.
So you want it for next one?
Yeah, we can hold it for the larger discussion, yeah.
All right. Do you have anything else, Alder Close?
Not at this time.
All right, thank you. All right, Alder Boers.
Big pivot to specifically talk about a couple of the points that Ms. Tempest made regarding yard usage. There were, I think, several alders that were very concerned initially when we saw the original draft, because it was very restrictive. And I know that we provided feedback, there have been rewrites. I wanted to ask if Sam could clarify a couple of points. I believe that all side yard restrictions, street yard restrictions, and significant limitations on cultivation for personal use had been removed from code. So if we could get a clarification on that. And then also specific to ground cover, mosses and clover. I know white clover is very popular as an alternative as opposed to grass in yards, and a much more environmentally friendly option as well. Are there restrictions on mosses and clover as ground cover in yards? And then just if you can clarify about the other point with cultivation, please.
Yeah, I apologize for the confusion. You know, we talked about this a lot at the Plan Commission. The intent was to never overregulate someone from gardening on their property. The intent was to try to limit the ability to seek an agricultural tax exemption, which is governed by the state for a residential property, which has happened, particularly for like estate lot type homes in other parts of the state. So yes, we have clarified that those are allowed. The Plan Commission acted on permitting those in additional areas. And if, you know, it's the will of the council, we can make it even more explicit that that is not what we're trying to regulate at all. Like we like people gardening on the whole, and the Plan Commission made that very clear. The landscaping regulations largely are silent on whether someone could do that or not. So it'd be kind of de facto permissive for someone to use clover or other types of stuff. This doesn't modify any of the weed ordinances that would lie in other parts of your code. So if you need to modify those separately to comply with that, that might be a fully separate discussion outside of zoning. Sometimes that's like a public works type conversation there. But from a pure what's in this draft, it is not, those types of lawns are not prohibited, particularly for low-scale residential uses. Where we are prohibiting non-native grasses is when they're used to meet the screening obligations of this code. So if the regulation said you have a parking lot, you need to screen it in some way, shape, or form, they added the appropriate number of trees that the code requires. We say you cannot just grass it in the middle with non-native grasses. They're going to have to choose kind of a native planting for the everything between what the city's requiring area. And there's an exhaustive list of native plantings of what could be included there. So say on the whole, this is much, anytime the city is requiring landscaping for a site amenity, it is focusing on using native plantings. When it is not requiring landscaping, it is relatively silent on what people can use outside of that.
I'll supplement that by noting that white clover is included in the native plant list.
Thank you. I appreciated the native plant focus and the additions that were made to the code, so thank you. On a different topic, Chair, the ADU section of zoning, which is on page 100, my computer has gone to sleep. I can tell you that there are specific restrictions on page 100. Thank you. Around ADUs, specifically number 2, number 3, and number 4. So number 2, ADUs shall not be located on lots occupied by a 2-unit house, townhouse, or cottage court development. Personally, I think with the number of upper, lower residences that we have in the community, many of which would have the ability to add an ADU, that would, I feel, unnecessarily limit those. I don't know why townhouses necessarily would be specifically limited as well. There's some sort of cottage courts, I think, are their own kind of consideration, but 2-unit houses in particular, especially if that's referring to a duplex or an upper lower, I think that that restriction should be removed from the ADU section.
So are you asking for a straw poll on that?
I'm asking for a straw poll on that.
All right,
And then-
Sam would first like to speak on that.
Sure.
Yes,
Sam.
thank you.
I just wanted to provide some context on how we got to that decision, and that was through talking residential density at the Plan Commission. And the approach the Plan Commission took when we were creating the use categories is to essentially take a a light touch on residential regulation. So we set setbacks, height limits, and then in that R3 category, essentially, you're allowed up to 2 units on your property, however you'd like to put them in there. So if we're going to broaden that out to and add an ADU, we can make that change based on, the feedback of the straw poll. But I just want to provide that context of that's kind of how we got to the decision making, was to lighten up the regs on residential uses and just allow people to provide 1 to 2 units, however they saw fit, as long as it met kind of setbacks and bulk zoning requirements.
Sam, can you please speak to the council about the threshold trigger for heightened building and fire safety regulations with respect to the number of units on a property?
Yeah, generally above 2.5 stories, the building code will kick in more strict either fire suppression or fire escape regulations. Regarding accessory dwelling units in general, I've worked for communities that have had them half a decade or more and have permitted fewer than 5 of them. So that's not to say they won't be popular in Sheboygan. Every community is different. I just want the council to be aware of typically the burden to putting in an accessory dwelling unit, particularly after we update this code to make them more permissive, will be cost and utility considerations, which are not controlled, obviously, at your level, state plumbing code, and just cost of construction. So don't be surprised if you adopt them and you don't get a lot of those permits in the long run, because much of that is just outside really any community's control in Wisconsin.
I would just like to make them as accessible as possible.
Yeah, and through zoning, we can remove any limitations that were existing for them. So at least that is not a barrier to them, but there are pretty substantial barriers elsewhere that, where they're difficult to implement, and that's separate from this kind of zoning discussion.
Understood.
Alder Borst, for the sake of clarity in polling, I'll first ask whether,
Yep. Alder Bellinger. Before we vote, I don't necessarily have an issue with it. I just have a question of maybe a possible unintended consequence either for Taylor or for Sam. Typically in these high-density areas where there's multifamily, whether it's a duplex, fourplex, whatever, and you put another ADU in there, there are parking issues. And there's a lot of parking issues in the city right now. And is this going to exacerbate this, cause more problems? Is this the reason why this wasn't included in here? And again, I'm not necessarily against it. It's just a question, and I'm just kind of wondering what the unintended consequence may be if we were to do this.
Sam?
I think that's a great question, and is probably very locationally specific based on the neighborhood and the amount of available street parking. I don't know that I can paint with a broad enough brush to say that it would be an issue in every area, but it could be in certain areas, closer to downtown, or areas where you see seasonal parking or event-style parking that can take over some of that street parking too. So it would not be my recommendation to layer on ADUs with additional parking regulations. I think that has worked, creates other unintended consequences in urban lots for like impervious surface issues and lot runoff. So I think it is just kind of the consequence to permitting them in more areas is, knowing that we may have to come back and address some parking issues later on. And frankly, it's a good segue to, what I was talking about in my presentation of a lot of this is going to be, continued test drive. I heard a lot about, building back the trust from the public here. And I think by adopting regulations and then coming back and fine tuning them as you get that feedback is how you start to, continuously build that trust on zoning text amendments like this. So, whether you all want to approve it on duplex lots to reallow the ADU is up to you, but parking could be an issue.
Thank you.
All right.
may I proceed?
Yep.
All right. The first polling question is whether ADUs should be allowed on duplex lots. Raise your hand if you support this.
Unanimous.
Next, triplex lots.
So, ADUs on triplex lots. Okay, so yeah. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 4.
4. All right. Townhomes. All right, and I don't believe that cottage courts would be viable by their definition, so may I stop at that?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. So the other two items here, number 3 and number 4. So additional entrances shall not be added to the front elevation of existing residential building, but may be added to side, rear, or street side elevations. I'm just curious about why that is a restriction, that an entrance cannot be added to the front of a building. So I'm thinking specifically of somebody who converts a garage, for instance, and that may be the most obvious place to for them to place a entry as opposed to the side of the house. Is that cosmetic, or is there some other reason for that restriction?
Sam?
Yeah, that's an aesthetic concern. You see it pretty common, and it's really stemming from like accessory dwelling unit. It's meant to be accessory to the primary structure. So from an urban form perspective, a lot of communities will, through that regulation, kind of force the ADU to be secondary to the primary unit. So on the garage example, they would have to kind of enter from the side or rear if they convert that garage to a living area. So it's mostly aesthetic in nature. I don't think, as long as they met building code, there's like a functional issue for multiple doors. It's kind of what do you want the flavor of the front view of those residential areas to look like. And many communities decide the accessory dwelling unit should be accessory in aesthetics as well as like access.
Claire Bors?
I'd like to see that one struck. I just don't see it as being purposeful if it's purely aesthetic.
All right, we have a suggestion to strike the prohibition on an ADU entrance, to allow for an ADU entrance on the front side of the principal building.
Hold on, right after that, Alder Decker has a question.
Comment. I guess we're kind of going over what the planning commission is for. We're kind of taking over their position on this. This is kind of something that the planning commission kind of goes over, where entrances of buildings are, where things like that are. And I think we're kind of overriding that. I think this is something that should be decided by the planning commission, not by the council.
I think this document started with the Plan Commission, and we're making edits to it as we go, and we do have the opportunity to make amendments even when it comes to council in the end. So obviously, Plan Commission could disagree with this, and they could add this back in or override that before it's sent back to council, but that's, I thought, what we were here to do today.
Yeah. I guess what I'm saying is they're the experts on it. I mean, that's what that's what the people that are on there. They're the ones that take care of it.
I will tell you.
That's what.
Okay, thank you.
So.
Alder Decker, the final document, I should say, not the final document, the document that council is ready to refer to the Plan Commission will be available for the Plan Commission to make suggestions to and refer that back to council.
Okay. That's fine.
All right, so the polling question is, do you support eliminating the ban on ADU entrances on the front side of the principal building?
All right.
Thank you. And then the last point is number 4, ADU, entrances to ADUs may not face the nearest side or rear property line unless there is an alley abutting that property line. Just again, the reasoning for that, is it cosmetic, or is there some other consideration of why it cannot face the side or the rear?
I believe that relates to emergency response.
I think there's a separate one, though, here specifically about emergency response, that it must be connected to a street frontage or paved walkway or driveway.
Right. The alley would be the access point. If you're having the entrance adjacent to an alley, then emergency response can approach from the alley.
So
I'll defer to Sam.
entrances of ADUs may not face the nearest side or rear property line unless there is an alley abutting. So it could face the front of the property line, meaning that it's facing the front of the structure that it's potentially built behind, and that would be okay? And
Sam?
Fire chief's not here to answer this one, but I guess from an accessibility perspective, my understanding which was as long as there was some sort of paved or path that leads to the entrance, specifically if they need to take in gurneys or something of that nature, if there's an emergency, that's accessible. Just want to clarify that, I guess.
Yeah, I think in concert, the idea is when you have an ADU, the front door to that ADU is facing that rear yard. Unless you have an alley, then it can face out towards the alley. So those two lines that you just highlighted in tandem, we're working towards that kind of aesthetic goal. You know,
Aesthetic and not safety related.
for the most part, yes, although if you do remove the cannot face near a side or rear property line, you may want to consider at least deferring to us to let us write some minor language to ensure more clear emergency access requirements in here. Which should just be a sentence. I just don't want you to have to like write that sentence on the fly, but you know, get at
Right.
that goal.
Okay, I think that would be helpful then.
So are you suggesting that we allow for side and rear property line access points with adequate emergency response?
Yes.
Poll, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Alrighty. Alder Gravine.
Yes, I kind of have a general question about conditional use permits. Does this eliminate using conditional use permits for all different things or just as far as the zoning code goes?
Sam.
Conditional uses are a special zoning permission under state statute. So there are no conditional use permits outside of any zoning consideration. The draft as it currently is presented eliminates all conditional uses because your ability to assign conditions must be based on substantial evidence. And so while I really empathize with a lot of the comments here tonight regarding wanting to add conditional uses back in, you know, that decision is ultimately yours. I just think you need to know the consequence to that is there could very likely be a conditional use that no one likes, but they meet all the substantial evidence requirements, and you must approve under state statute. If you choose to deny it anyways, you know, the city attorney can expand on this further, but we have seen circumstances where the state law allows, if you deny a conditional use and someone challenges it, a judge at the circuit court level can approve that conditional use without remanding it back to the city. So you could take a principled stand and be like, you know, the public really hates this conditional use. Even though they meet all our standards, we're going to deny it anyways, only for a circuit court judge or a court of appeals to say, nope, it had to be based on substantial evidence, so we're going to approve that conditional use. That's why
I was just going to supplement that by saying if a circuit court judge imposes that ruling, the judge does not necessarily also impose conditions on the approval the way that a plan commission would.
Exactly. They can just approve it without any of the standards that you would have. So it is simplest to defer to rezoning decisions and keeping your code up to date. I think it provides the least legal liability. When you want to say no, you are afforded the option to say no, and that is why it is our recommendation. If you choose to consider conditional uses or adding them back in, I would be extremely careful about how and when we apply those standards, because oftentimes the most controversial uses are the ones that are the hardest to say no to under the state law. I'll give you an example. The reason why the legislature wrote this was from a case regarding a frac sand mine that they improperly denied, which, you know, I don't know that anyone wants a frac sand mine in their backyard, but the mine agreed to meet a variety of conditions, and then the community denied it anyways. And the legislature thought that was a problem, so they drafted this law in 2017. So it is not, I don't like to be the bearer of bad news. It is a tool that you used to have that is much less powerful than it was previously. Yes, your current ordinance does address Act 67, but I think in a way that is performative at best. I don't think it gets to the heart of the issues. And also, we have seen as the law has gotten older in time, more successful challenges to conditional uses in other areas. So property owners have gotten more litigious over time because they've seen, other people win on challenging these conditional use denials. So that all of that together informs our recommendation to not consider conditional uses and instead default to kind of the standards that you've set, which is through the legislative process, set standards in your zoning code and then apply them evenly and fairly.
And thank you for the clarification.
Yeah.
Alder Decker had a question.
I just had a real quick question. Can there be financial, as far as like, if say that this would be in, and we would deny and they would challenge it, could the city be liable for financial damages or something like that?
Potentially. It really depends on the details of the case. I would hate to say whether it would or wouldn't. I think the biggest immediate danger to the city, as Attorney Majerus pointed out, is that a circuit court judge could not only approve a conditional use, but approve it without the thoughtful conditions that the Plan Commission or Common Council would want to put on it. So again, substantial evidence is a pretty high bar to beat. An example often used is traffic, right? A substantial evidence type of standard for traffic would be a traffic impact analysis by a licensed traffic engineer. And if that said the traffic was good, even though the residents didn't believe it, you would have to approve that conditional use. So there can just be that really tough rub between those, like what rises to the level of, substantial evidence under the statute and what doesn't.
Any follow-up, Alder Gravine?
No, thank you.
All right. Alder Close.
Thank you. So I'd like to bring this back to some of the residential uses as well. So I'd like for the zoning code to be able to protect some small business growth in residential areas, but currently the zoning code does prohibit any kind of professional or service, the B-1 types of business in the SN and UN sections. And I'm referencing specifically page 68 and 69, the chart that's presented there. So I would like to allow for both the SN and UN types of zoning to be able to allow for those professional and service types of business entities, possibly with the caveat of limiting the no drive-throughs, no signage, keeping the typical traffic down to what is typical of a residential block. But I would like to see the code to reflect the ability for residential areas to allow for these B1 types of professional and service businesses.
I think now would be a good time to do a brief recess, Chair.
All right, we will.
Restroom break?
Yeah, so at 8:20, be back. All right, all alders, get back to your seats. Alders, get back to your seats. Well, it's not quite. I'm trying to get them there before. I said 8:20. I'm trying to be preemptive here. You see when... Yeah, it's like herding cats. All right, alders, back to your seats. All right, first, do you want to do the announcement? So Administrator Bradley has an announcement, and then Attorney Majerus has a question.
All right, just for everybody's information, the live stream did stop at 7:30 and will be posted tomorrow morning. We're still recording, it's just the live stream. It cut into separate programming on SCS's website, so the programming will be posted tomorrow morning.
All right, and then Attorney Majerus.
Thank you. This question is directed towards Sam. If you can speak to the changes in authority to the Plan Commission and Common Council under the proposed zoning code.
Sure. So the changes in authority are really, right now, the Plan Commission is doing a lot of conditional use approval stuff. We've talked about the issues with conditional uses and, kind of the changes to state law just before we broke. The other thing the Plan Commission is doing is reviewing a lot of kind of like site plan level work. And oftentimes that's to discuss landscaping standards or other types of things. So here, that's why we're trying to write in these objective standards is to make them more objective for staff to implement. I'll go back to that example of a building inspector, right? When you submit a shed permit, you don't go to the building code committee where they hash out how far the studs have to be away from each other. The building inspector reads the building code and then either approves or denies the plan based on the adopted code. So the idea is those types of approvals where it is black and white, based on a standard, the staff, you have competent staff that can review those things. All of the other legislative type decisions or decisions that are specifically stated in the state statutes that are Plan Commission or Common Council level authority, those all remain at the Common Council or Plan Commission as appropriate. So those could be platting of streets, platting of lots, comprehensive planning and neighborhood planning, changing the zoning text like we're doing right now, changing the zoning map for a specific property designation within the zoning code. So all of those high-level decisions that require public notices and public hearings and all of that stays the same. The only thing that is changing under the draft code is we are setting more objective standards than deferring to staff to review and administer those. Now, you all made the change for the large factory uses to go back to the Plan Commission and Common Council as part of our discussion tonight. I, functionally don't have as much of an issue with that based on your conversation tonight, but I would be cautious in your conversations moving forward about, where authority lies. Going back to the state statute, it is pretty clear on what the state intended the Plan Commission to review. So we're trying to get to that level of substantive conversation. When you're reviewing a decision at the Plan Commission or Common Council, it is always something that you have the legal ability to say no to. And that's why it's important.
Alder Decker had a question.
A question on what he was speaking on. I just wanted to ask, appeals are also, like, if say a staff member says, nope, you can't do this, they are allowed to appeal to the Planning Commission and the Common Council.
No, not to the Plan Commission and Common Council, but they can appeal. So the state statutes are very explicit that if someone appeals, it goes to a Board of Appeals of citizen members.
Oh, okay.
So all appeals of staff, we call those appeals of administrative decisions, or zoning variance requests always go to the Board of Appeals. And that is mandated to stay the way it is by state statute. So none of that changes either.
Okay, great.
All right, and then Alder Perella had a quick question.
Yes, which goes back to the subject of the CPUs and the need with the proposal that we straw polled before. I was thinking that if we are able to do that, if we incorporate a change of procedure for mid-size or large-scale FUs, then the mechanism to go back to the Plan Commission should be either a conditional use for the mid-size and perhaps a PDD for the large size, because I don't see otherwise which mechanism would we use for that. And the reason behind that, in my reasoning, trying to find a reasoning, is we can, and that's a discussion for the next committee meeting, we can have requirements without interfere with Act 67 and 16. We can have requirements in relation to enforcement, violation, reports, requirements that will need a verification from the Plan Commission and the Committee and the Common Council. In other words, Sam, I'm asking actually for a confirmation if that is correct. So there are requirements that we can put in place for a specific development, a category, sorry, which would then even more justify a going back through a CUP or PDD or both for large facilities and medium facilities. I don't know if I could explain myself, so I can try to.
I think I got your question.
Okay, good, thank you.
So the state statute considers any special zoning permission essentially a conditional use. So you can call it whatever you want, but it's a conditional use, except if you're putting in like a level of site plan review, some of those conditional use standards may or may not apply. It kind of depends on the individual regulation you're putting in. Whenever the council is setting a condition on an application, whether it's part of a special zoning permission, conditional use, or outside of it, you have to consider the statutes, as we've already discussed tonight. You also have to consider kind of this rough proportionality, essential nexus type of legal consideration. So there's federal case law about the types of conditions that a community can put on specific uses, and they have to be approximately proportional to the impact they cause. And there's a lot of communities that go over that line in that essential nexus and get in trouble for adding in conditions. You know, this use is going over here, they have a lot of money, so we're going to force them to fix a water main 10 blocks away, that kind of thing, where it's not related to the specific development. So that is for conditional uses. I think we can word it in a way for the level of site plan review, zoning compliance review, where we're not rewriting this entire code. We can capture what you want for the large factory type uses for requiring that level of review without adding in conditional uses back into the entire code. I think we can do both. Make you all happy, get that level of review, but not open kind of that legal Pandora's box on conditional uses. On planned development districts, those are effectively a zoning map and a zoning text change, and they're a completely different box of type of zoning permission. So forcing someone into a planned development district is a whole separate conversation. In short, I would say I would not recommend forcing anyone into a planned development district without us going back to the drawing board for a lot of other things. So I would say what you have adopted through your straw poll now is very workable, and I think we can accomplish what you want. And I don't think we need to add in planned development districts to that.
I have a short follow-up, Chair, if I can. And would that be alignable with requirements that we can put in place specifically for data centers? And I know I don't want to discuss data centers. I just want, I don't want to, I want to make sure that that is doable. So even if there is no conditional use specifically, but we can put in place requirements in respect of the Wisconsin state laws and of Act 16 and Act 67 that we can work with.
It is always best to put in those requirements through the legislative process. So proactively through a zoning text amendment to literally add them into your zoning code, because that's where you have the most authority to make those changes.
Very good.
So proactive is best. When doing the site plan review, you are limited in the types of conditions that you can put on through both that Nolan-Dolan essential nexus thing I just mentioned and the substantive evidence type conditions. So you're much more limited in the type of conditions, kind of ad hoc, that you can put on a development through the development review process. A good example is in relation to like utility usage. You know, I'll go to data centers because they're an easy punching bag, right? But we've discussed them as large factory uses to try to be broad and forward thinking of when these might apply to the next type of data center that, you know, everyone is upset about. But a lot of those things are also functionally regulated at different levels of government in the state of Wisconsin. So you all are easy to get a hold of, and residents give you a call and complain to you. But power generation is largely regulated at the Public Service Commission at the state level. Utility fees and connections are regulated through Public Service Commission approvals. And the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources regulates air permitting and other types of wetland and environmental permissions. So anytime that you are modifying those types of approvals, particularly outside of the legislative process, in like a conditional use type ad hoc condition, I get very, very nervous. It's the long and short of it. Because then you end up with the biggest number of potential legal quagmires that you'll get yourself into. So
yeah, and I wasn't really thinking of, I'm not really thinking of reinventing the wheel and putting the city in a bad spot. I'm more thinking of requirements for violations, for enforcement, for reports. I cannot say how much water they can use, but I can say I want a report every month.
Yeah.
As an example.
Yes, you can. But again, I think through the legislative process is always better, because oftentimes those types of considerations might also be valuable adds to your general city policies in general, right? Like you may want to talk through it, and there are oftentimes staff concerns, right, about how you're implementing and enforcing those, not just in year 1 or year 2, but year 5, 10, 15, 20, that deserve discussion and feedback. So that's why I always say the legislative process, zoning text amendments is the cleanest way, the best, most protective legal route to add all those considerations. You can add them after the fact. You just have to be extremely careful in how you do it. And you oftentimes put staff in the hot seat in those meetings to give you like projected legal implications without really having the time to consider what you're adding on to those approval processes. So you can do it.
Thank you.
Short answer, you can do it. Just be extremely careful in how you do it.
All right, Alder Bellinger had a question on this topic.
Thank you, Chair. Not so much a question, but just a comment regarding conditional use permits. I was on the Plan Commission for years, and the previous city attorney on numerous occasions said to us as members of the Plan Commission, you can't deny this. And, you know, and I was kind of wondering, why is this even on the agenda? Why do we have to approve? If we can't deny it, why do we have to approve it? So it didn't make sense to me on that. And then if they want an extension, you can't deny the extension either. So again, the extension comes before you, and it's like, that's on the agenda too. It's like, well, why is this on the agenda if we can't, why isn't it just automatic? And it says, but legally you can't deny it. So I applaud removing it and getting it out of there. And because as a member of the Plan Commission, it does become cumbersome, even if there's something distasteful that you don't want to approve. I mean, the attorney says you don't have a choice, you have to do it.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to go back to Alder Close now from prior to our break.
All right,
Unless,
so
did you have another question, Attorney?
Have we resolved the questions on this topic for now?
Yes.
Okay, so I believe that the suggestion on the floor from Alder Close is to allow for professional service types of businesses in suburban neighborhood and urban neighborhood use districts. So for those of you that are following along, the use table is on page 75, and the definition of suburban neighborhood is a zoning district accommodating predominantly suburban-style residential development with one dwelling unit per lot. The definition of urban neighborhood is zoning district accommodating traditional residential development patterns with smaller lot sizes and allowing for up to 2 attached dwelling units per lot and townhouses. Alder Close, if you'd like to add more to that?
Yes, actually, so I would like to add some caveats to that as well, and not just a blanket B1 professional and service. I would like to have some asterisks on that. My ideas would be in, but I'm open to any kind of other asterisks that people would like to add later on or staff would think were appropriate to limit. But I wanted to limit the uses to no drive-through, no outdoor storage, no more than 2 non-resident employees, as well as limiting the display as well as the traffic for these types of units. So really limiting the scope of what a B1 is. My goal is, and my intent is to foster businesses similar to what we saw with Nellie and the Fat Man or Sunday Dough when they were starting out, when they were from an at-home facility. So small scale, residentially based businesses.
All right, so to clarify on this, currently in a residential zone, there are certain businesses that are allowed as long as they don't negatively impact the residential neighborhood community. So examples of factors that could negatively impact a residential community are increased traffic, so service options where people are coming in, buying retail, parking up and down the neighborhood street, that sort of thing. Businesses that are particularly loud or have higher light pollution issues, things like that. There are also regulations built into this draft that allow for businesses that would normally, you probably wouldn't want next to your home, but with certain screening options. So I think for the sake of clarity in moving forward on this, we'll break it into parts. The first question is whether there is support to allow for certain professional and business services within a suburban neighborhood district.
Hold on, before we do that, Alder Decker had a question.
I guess I have a question or concern, I guess, is, my concern is we're looking at, say, a residential neighborhood with, say, like a cul-de-sac or something like that. You've got basically a pretty quiet street, and now someone opens up a business where there's now several hundred cars possibly, or maybe 100 cars a day going through where there was never any traffic before. With something like this, you'd be opening it up to something of this nature. Is that what you're proposing?
No, I would like to, like I said earlier, I would like to limit the traffic so that it's typical to a residential block where possible.
All right, so I think you had started with B1.
It's pretty difficult to do that.
Alder Decker would like a follow-up.
I guess it'd be pretty difficult if you're going to have, like, say, a bakery, a pickup bakery or something like that, if it's on like I said, a cul-de-sac or something like that, you would have, you could potentially have, how are you going to say you're going to limit the traffic without, you're allowing the business, so you're allowing the traffic. I mean, that's the question that we have to balance here before we would put something like that into there.
All right, I think I can clarify the question here. So maybe my first polling question, I'm gonna strike that, and instead of saying certain professional and business services, I'll say B1, because that would be consistent with the zone. And B1 uses are, include among others, the use of a building for office, professional, or service-type transactions, including storage of records and accounts. Uses include animal hospitals, kennels, pounds, banks, financial services, automobile showrooms, car washes, civic administration, dry cleaning, laundry pickup and delivery, food processing establishments, and commercial kitchens not associated with restaurants, cafeterias, and similar dining facilities up to or not more than 2,500 square feet. Laboratories, outpatient healthcare, salons, showrooms, post offices, print shops, and professional service offices. So the polling question is, do you want B1 allowed in a suburban neighborhood district?
So I would strike that. That's not my intent, is to have that broad of a definition.
Okay, so then we would look to, what was the other category of business type?
I did not have another one beyond. B1 was the closest facsimile that I had for a type of neighborhood scale business. I don't think we have a neighborhood scale business definition available currently. Again, my intent is to allow for small neighborhood scale businesses, not necessarily large scale retail or those types of business like auto showroom and things like that.
Sure, okay.
Alder Decker has a quick question.
I guess I'm just going to reiterate what I said to Alder Boris. I think we're kind of micromanaging the Planning Commission. This is, I mean, you're a member of the Planning Commission. I think it would be better if you brought it up at the Planning Commission and because they're more nuanced for this kind of thing than for us to be, we're doing this on the fly. And I don't think that that's a good way to do things, is legislating on the fly, coming up with ideas and not having time to research it and things like that.
Sam, do you have a suggestion to perhaps consider Alder Close's concern for, it sounds like walkable neighborhoods, basically?
Yeah, I've seen it. I have a couple different ideas that we could talk through. The first would be expanding home occupation businesses slightly to include some non-resident type businesses. If that's the route you wanted to go down, essentially not requiring that someone lives at the property to operate a business out of it in a residential area, but it would otherwise fall under a home occupation like a renter or something like that. The other idea that I've worked to implement in other communities is utilizing the street classification system. So permitting residential or businesses in residential neighborhoods by if they fall along a collector or an arterial street, but not on a local street. I don't know that that captures exactly what you're talking about, but I have seen some communities draw the line there instead. So, that could be another option. If you wanted to take kind of a first step, if it goes well, then introduce them more. Some will allow them on corners only, which are typically wider or have secondary access points, more parking than on the interior of a block. So in urban neighborhoods particularly, I don't think what you're proposing is uncommon, but they typically come with one of those qualifiers in there.
Yeah, and I think that's in line with what my intent is. I'm looking to establish some guidelines around home occupant businesses.
Do you have a preference for the polling suggestion as far as first steps being expansion of home occupation or aligning with certain categories of street?
No, I don't have a preference offhand.
Okay, should I poll both?
Yes.
All right. So the first polling question is whether expanded home occupations should be allowed in SN and UN districts. Or do you want me to split up the districts?
Yes, please.
All right, so the first one is expanded home occupations in SN districts. I can reread what that is if anyone would like it.
All right. So,
If you support expanded home occupation in suburban neighborhood districts, it's typically one dwelling unit per lot, suburban style residential.
all right.
Okay. Urban neighborhood district, expanded home occupation. Urban neighborhood is traditional residential development with smaller lot sizes, allowing up to 2 attached dwelling units per lot and townhouses.
Okay, show of hands.
Okay. The next question is permitting businesses in SN districts on collector or arterial streets, but not on local streets.
Can you,
So what is the difference between an arterial and collector street versus a local street, Sam?
Typically, it's a mixture of traffic and right-of-way width. So an arterial street might be a county trunk or a state trunk highway, 100 to 120 feet wide, something that you'd consider to be moving traffic, built for moving traffic. A collector street is kind of that middle type road. So your main street, maybe 80 feet wide. It might have expanded parking lanes or bike lanes on it. And then a local street would be 60 to 60 feet. 66 feet wide, kind of think of your standard neighborhood street. That's going to be, not have pavement markings or that type of thing.
Okay, so with that understanding, the polling question is whether to allow businesses in SN districts on collector and arterial streets, but not local streets.
show of hands.
Okay, same question, urban neighborhood.
That's 4.
Okay, so to repeat, we have 6 in support of expanding home occupation businesses in suburban neighborhood and 6 in support of permitting businesses on the larger streets in a suburban neighborhood district. We have 5 supporting expanded home occupation businesses in urban neighborhood and 4 supporting businesses on collector or arterial streets in the urban neighborhood district.
I would recommend that come at revisit at a later date since it was 4 to 4 on that one.
I think there's 9 of us here.
2, 4. Oh,
So that one would be, that one would fail.
never mind. Yeah. My
I
bad.
do want to offer a practical question, and Sam, correct me if I'm off base here, but you're going to find more collector and arterial streets in an urban neighborhood than a suburban one. So our polling results are a little flipped from what reality would suggest. So I guess maybe the best way forward on this issue would be to do a poll preference between doing just expanded home occupation or doing expanded home occupation plus the arterial and collector streets.
Alder Close.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, Alder Boris.
It sounded as though expanding it on connector and whatever the other street was could be more restrictive than just the home-based, correct? So if we just based it on the expansion of the home base, then that's probably more inclusive across the board. Is that accurate?
To a degree. So if you are basing it solely on expanded home occupations, then for Alder Decker's example of a cul-de-sac or a quiet neighborhood, you could have that heightened traffic conflict. If you go with the arterial or collector street, then you're reducing the negative impacts on the neighborhood. So for example, I would consider 14th Street to be an arterial street. I would consider Superior Avenue to be a collector street. And then I would look at, you know, the numerical roads going north and south as the local roads. So do you want to allow it everywhere, or do you want to focus it in, like, right in logical places?
Let's have a city engineer jump define this for us.
I think Sam had a good summary of collector streets and arterial streets. I'm just pulling up the map here to see what the roadway system looks like. Major collectors and arterials are really the state highways, 14th Street, South Business Drive, Taylor Drive, North Avenue. A lot of the other streets are obviously the local streets, with a heavy collection of higher volume streets in the downtown areas.
So I guess Alder Close, would you like me to poll the group on a preference between, or would you like to stick with the numbers as is and do both approaches?
I think I'd like to stick with the numbers as is. Go.
Okay, so then the result of that is there is majority support for expanded home occupations in SN and UN districts, and there is majority support for street-based permissions for businesses in SN districts. Did you have anything further?
No.
Alrighty. Alder Boris.
If I could ask about the dark skies language, I believe the first rewrite of the zoning code did not contain that language, and I apologize if I missed that. But I know that there were some thoughtful recommendations that had been made by a constituent around pretty expansive language regarding dark skies. I wasn't sure if that was added.
That was added.
Thank you. Okay. And then for Director Zeinert, I know that there was some discussion this week and previously at the Historic Preservation Commission regarding concerns around that body's authority regarding somewhere in the neighborhood of about, I think, 1,200 buildings in the city. And could you comment on that? And did you get the adequate feedback for any additions or changes that would need to be made from the Historic Preservation Commission?
Director Zeinert.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to clarify, initially with the previous zoning code update, the hope was to move the HPC, Historical Preservation Commission, to a section that has all of the other boards, commissions, committees, and things of that nature. HPC would prefer to have their authority be stationed in the zoning code. HPC had met yesterday. I want to say at 4, we wrapped at 4:45. Member Attorney Mayor had mentioned that he still felt like this new zoning code missed a portion of it. Unfortunately, I have not been able to dig into that yet today, just with other matters and pre-scheduled things. My hope is to look in it tomorrow and later this week and to confirm with Attorney Majerus.
I believe we copied and pasted the existing Historic Preservation Commission language into this draft, so if there's something missing, it would be inadvertent.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else?
Thank you, Chair.
All right. Are any other alders wishing to be heard? Otherwise, I'm going to ask Attorney Majerus, would this be recommended to go back to City Council?
So because you've earlier stated that you want this to be brought back to Committee of the Whole,
Okay.
and because we are dealing with the change in council term,
Yep.
the next step would be to refer this to council,
Okay.
to be referred forward into the future term for discussion at the next Committee of the Whole.
Perfect. So, Alder.
Second.
All right, Alder Bellinger made the motion. Alder Boris made the second. All in favor, please state aye.
Aye.
All opposed, chair votes aye. Our next scheduled meeting will be to be determined. I am looking for a motion to adjourn. Well, hold on. There's
this
it
is a
has to be
special one.
special.
All right, Chair, I make a motion to, if no meeting before April 20th, adjourn, Senate aye.
Second.
Alder Decker made the motion. Alder Bellinger made the second. All in favor of adjournment, state aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. We are adjourned at 8:54. Thank you, everybody.
It happens once a year. And
Yes.
Johnny Walker Blue is calling my name.